My mother used to work overnight shifts at the hospital, which meant I wouldn't see her until the next morning, likely still in her work attire, in deep slumber. I used to prepare breakfast for her every day so that she would have something nice to eat once she woke up. By nice, I mean whatever a 16-year-old who didn't have home economics class could cook. However, my mother never complained about the breakfast platter of toast, scrambled eggs, and turkey bacon arranged on her bedside table. We would say our goodbyes around 10:15, after which I would gather in front of the television with my dog. I would switch off the lights to enhance the viewing experience. It was during one of these TV sessions that I decided to elevate my experience a bit more by smoking some weed, so I headed to my room situated in a narrow, long corridor on the other side of the house. This side of the house, apart from my room, consisted of an unused guest room and my dad's former office. Since my dad's passing, we didn't have any guests, and so the room became a storage place for all the clothes, paintings, and other unused items I couldn't bear to part with. On reaching my room, I took the bong off my bedside table. It wasn't your average bong, but an artistic, almost sculpture-like piece made entirely out of blue, hand-blown glass inspired by the tumultuous waves of the ocean. A curious feature of it was its ability to glow in the dark when exposed to the sun for a while. Carrying it with me as I made my way through the corridor and down the staircase, I settled back on the couch next to my dog Peppy, who was fast asleep. I began prepping the green sticky plant matter, an oddly named strain I'd gotten from my regular supplier. It was a fresh arrival, and he'd asked if I could test it to provide feedback. Agreed instantly, because who turns down an offer for cheaper weed provided in return for feedback? Inspecting it, I noticed the assortment of colors reflected off its crystals, including unusual hues of red, blue, and pink, which was peculiar. Nonetheless, intrigued more than I was suspicious, I went ahead and filled my pipe. The weed tasted like any other at first, but was then followed by a slight hint of citrus. This was going to make the report back to my supplier interesting. With the Dateline episode playing, and my body starting to feel lighter and almost sinking into the couch cushions, my eyes became dry and heavy. It was soon after that I fell asleep. Waking up after what felt like quite some time, my body was heavy and reluctant to move. The overhead lights were still switched off as I'd left them, and so were the rest downstairs. A sense of fright washed over me as I realized I couldn't budge from my spot. I was paralyzed. With only my eyes and the tips of my fingers and toes moving slightly, I was otherwise completely incapacitated, unable to cry out for help. Beside me, Peppy was still blissfully asleep. I tried reaching for him, but realized the futility of that action. The sound from the television narrator seemed to taunt me, and the previously comfy couch felt cold and rigid. The panic started not only because I was becoming aware of my dire situation, but also because I heard a sound from upstairs. I recognized it as originating from the top of the stairs, an intruder in my house at the top of the staircase leading right down to where I was. The additional sounds, resembling cracked bones in my terrified state, followed by slow, descending footsteps, made my stomach churn and my body writhe internally. Petrified, I focused on the one stair visible from my position on the couch, almost wishing to retreat into it. Appearing at the bottom of the staircase, I noticed a shadow of a hand, followed by a lament, muffled and trapped in my paralyzed state. I realized I was a petrified creature in the face of danger. That shadowy hand started to drum against the wall, breaking the silence. With its arms emergence from the shadow, the rest of the body was exposed, standing tall, about 8 feet high. The figure was gigantic, its limbs as long as its height, and its face with a grin that could have been mistaken for a smile, were it not for the fact there were no teeth visible. Its gums, bleeding and dripping onto my wooden floor, screamed of the immediate danger I was in. My eyes, wide open, witnessed its laugh. It found delight in my helpless attempts to scream, move, or offer any form of resistance. With its arms dangling by its side, beating a vicious rhythm, the creature moved slowly toward me. Its now visible face horrified me, the creature's smile exposing its bleeding gums, its eyes wide and locked with mine. Its nose consisted of only 2 holes. It resembled a human, corrupted by some devilish influence. The creature was close enough to sense the fear radiating off me and witness the dying hope in my eyes. But there was my bong, glowing green in the corner of my eye. Putting all my energy into moving my hand, I managed to grab the bong and started bashing it repeatedly over the creature's head. Instead of red blood, a dark, gooey substance came out. It splashed over everything, including my face, mouth, couch, floor, and walls. Awakening to the comfort of a bed and a pillow, I sighed, thankful for it all being just a nightmare, till I tried moving my hands. Restricted by a pair of handcuffs fastened to the bed's railing and the steady beep of a monitor, I realized I was in a hospital room, drenched in the metallic smell of blood, but red, not black. A stranger's voice from a police officer knocked me out of my stupor. He asked me if I remembered anything from the previous night, which was an absurd query considering the horrific memory of that smiling creature. Images sprawled before me revealed my mother, hardly recognizable, but for her uniform, lying dead in a horribly brutalized state. The realization of what the officers were implying made me scream. Tears filled my eyes. I couldn't stop crying. The confusion, the grief, the anger as I witnessed one of the officers drumming his fingers and breaking into that unforgettable and terrifying smile. I yearned for those rare evenings when my mother, attired in a glamorous gown, would kiss me on the forehead before stepping out for a night with a suitor, her heels click-clacking with every step she took. Those moments were scarce due to her day job at a local nursing home, which demanded 12-hour shifts. This was frequently followed by long nights of drinking, noisy television, and intense quarrels with her children at home. But this evening was different. The quiet solitude of nearly 5 hours was bestowed upon me as the rest of the family was away. In the privacy of my room, with a hidden trove of snacks spread across my bed, and exclusive access to our shared laptop, I was at a loss as to how to capitalize on this opportunity. Should I watch a film, sing along to karaoke tunes on YouTube, or dance to my satisfaction? As a fan of suspense, I opted to watch a horror film in the dark. Not more than 30 minutes into the film, I heard a faint, sinister giggle. Initially, I shrugged it off as a sound effect from the movie, but even after pausing it, the giggling persisted, sending chills down my spine. I stayed still, waiting for something to happen, but nothing did. I cautiously moved, causing the bed frame to squeak under my weight. I thought it might have been one of my siblings or neighbors' children playing pranks on me, but being a 16-year-old girl, I wasn't willing to take any risks. I scoured the room for potential weapons and located a hefty sports trophy amongst the child-safe items belonging to my 6- and 8-year-old roommates. The eerie laughter steadily grew louder and came closer. Now, I had a decision to make. Should I wait to be found or take the matter into my own hands? Holding the trophy tightly, I decided to wait it out. The laughter became more intense and jubilant. It reminded me of a child laughing with adult-like intensity. Then heard the sound of chairs being moved around, followed by a moist noise that I couldn't immediately identify. Whoever was in my kitchen was creating quite a racket, perhaps due to some peculiar, disturbing obsession with breaking into homes and slaughtering creatures. All through this, the chilling laughter continued. I was petrified, conscious of the fact that an unknown person was in my kitchen, laughing uncontrollably while preparing something at the counter. My phone was downstairs. I looked at my laptop and wondered if I could contact the police by email. I then thoroughly posted about my situation on social media, and sent an email for help. It was nerve-wracking to wait for 7 minutes till I heard a car pull up in the driveway. It didn't sound like the police. Suddenly, I heard someone run towards the front door, unlock it quickly, and open it. The laughter turned into a raucous, manic roar, followed by a shrill scream that echoed through the neighborhood. The person who screamed quickly fled down the street, and the laugh followed suit. Taking a peek from the window, I saw my sister running and screaming to alert everyone around. A man completely naked and covered in a profuse amount of blood was running away, laughing fiercely. A crowd soon formed outside my house, and my sister was reportedly distressed. I did not want to descend and face whatever made her so upset. Police sirens got louder as they approached my house, and soon they stormed inside. Profanity and sounds of nausea filled the air, followed by someone calling out my name. The sight of a female officer at my doorway provided some solace, although her advice to walk downstairs with my eyes closed was an immense challenge. Her grip tightened as we reached the first floor landing, and I couldn't resist taking a look. I saw my mother's severed body parts neatly arranged beside her headless torso on the counter and fainted. I had unknowingly listened to the gruesome kill for 47 minutes. The offender successfully made it back to his room at the nursing home after the act. His laughter persisted as he was restrained, arrested, and imprisoned, and even in court during his sentencing. He possibly laughed even when he was strapped on the execution chair. He will never laugh again. Neither will my mother. I was at the coffee house on my phone when I received a really creepy text. "Hi Carly." It was from an unknown caller. Instantly looked up and scanned the lounge as I felt eyes on me. There was a little kid being carried by his mom, staring. Well, after a moment I realized his gaze wasn't on me. At my half-finished iced coffee. This was an old coffee house, larger than most, which had been converted from a church. The stained glass windows let in fantastic light during the day, and at night, the moonlight created a natural blue rim around the outside, which was beautiful. It was my favorite place to hang out and people watch. Sometimes I'd sit in the corner making up stories about what people did, about where they were going next, or where they had been. This text message needed a reply. Who is this? I know you have a boyfriend, but you are really cute. Well, he was right that I had a boyfriend. And I'm glad he thought I was cute, but there was something instantly off about it. Perhaps that he was texting in lowercase. Who is this? He replied instantly. You don't know me. No crap. Sherlock is what I wanted to respond, but I was more curious. How did you get my number? Because you're pretty. Again, another compliment. But he didn't answer my question. My creep radar was up. And you probably give good kisses. Creepy alert confirmed. It was nearly 9:15 at night, and this place was emptying out, so I felt a little uneasy. But I wanted to know how he knew my name and number. I want to kiss your lips. Jesus. Enough with coming on to me so hard. Didn't he realize he was creepy? I assumed he was a complete stranger, but just wanted to make sure. Have we met? If I testify about myself, my testimony is not valid. John 5:31. Maybe he's trying to be creepy, or perhaps he thinks I'll share his love of the Bible. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give you. John 14:27. I thought of something funny and cute to write back, but then thought it might offend him. But a few moments later I sent it, wanting to see how he'd react. Well, John, I've seen people like you before, but I had to pay admission. Carly 9:15. Come. You're uber cute, and I want you for myself. Nice. So how did you get my number? I'm at the same coffee house as you. I was looking over your shoulder. Wait. This guy had been watching me text Frank, my boyfriend. It made sense. That's how he got my number and knew my name. Who the actual FK does something like that? Ordered you a coffee. I hope I got it right. They should be calling the lovely Carly any minute. I wasn't staying around to receive it. As I walked to my car, I texted back. The lovely Carly thanks you but isn't interested. You can keep it. You just got up and left. Yeah, did he really think now I'd drink his coffee and wait for a physical introduction? It also went through my head that maybe he was the barista, and that upcoming coffee was spiked with something bad. I had no idea who he was, but as I got to my car, I subtly checked to see if anyone was coming out. Do you know how I like my coffee? Just like my women. Ground up, tightly wrapped in a bag, chilling in my freezer. Frank had told me a fun thing to send people once. This was a perfect time. From 9230, the recipient you are sending to has chosen not to receive messages. Miss 2108. Submit yourselves for the Lord's sake to every authority instituted among me. Peter 2:13. He hadn't followed me from the store, but I still had this gut feeling I was being watched. It was then I noticed this car on the other side of the parking lot, which sat in the darkness with its lights off. I could tell someone was in there, and all my intuition told me it was him. As I pulled away, I received another Bible text. I might fill them with horror so they would know that I am the Lord. Ezekiel 20:25. I put the phone on my dashboard and switched it to speech to text so that I could speak to Frank. My eyes were pinned to that car, and right as I was about to turn out of the parking lot, its lights turned on. He was following me, keeping at a distance. He made every turn I made. Frank offered to leave work early and meet me at home, but I decided it wasn't necessary. Could look after myself. As I watched him behind me, he kept his distance. Just the way he drove, I could tell he'd done this before. When I got to my apartment complex, parked quickly, noticing him pull into a guest spot. As I walked to my front door, I pulled out my keys. I noticed him got out of his car. I'd been taught how to use a key as a weapon, so I was prepared, but nervously I still fumbled with the keys and dropped them. As I reached down, I caught him in the distance coming towards me. Quickly I picked them up, got in and locked the door. I live in a townhouse, which is 3 floors. When you go in, stairs lead directly up to my main space. I beelined up the stairs, immediately turning on the lights. But then I thought, with the lights on, from outside he could see me, so I turned them off. I ducked, then crawled over to the kitchen window and saw him in the parking lot. He was staring up. It was like he was staring directly at me. But I figured it was too dark for him to see me, and he was scoping out my building to see if I lived alone. I sat there in the dark for a good 10 minutes. The man outside walked towards my apartment, but disappeared out of view. My heart raced with anticipation as my eyes locked upon the second-floor balcony. Suddenly a hand clasped onto the railing outside. The creepy man was climbing up. I went to a kitchen drawer and grabbed the sharpest knife I had, then sat there, watching him on the balcony. He pressed his forehead against the glass, looking in. I sat there, hoping the darkness would hide me. Both the window and sliding doors were locked. He had no way in without alerting me. I quickly ran up the stairs to my bedroom and texted Frank that the man was on our second-floor balcony. Frank texted back, right away. You left a window open so he could get in, right? It costs a lot to replace broken glass. I didn't. I raced back downstairs and crept to the sliding doors. Silently, I lifted the latch, then rushed back up. I filmed the whole thing on my cell to send to Frank, which he always appreciated. Put on my mask, which I wear for all my kills, and turned up the music loud. Put the shower on, hoping it would inspire the man to enter. As I waited in the bedroom, I was filled with excitement. Simultaneously, I worried that he might not follow through. I pondered whether I'd need to return downstairs to check, which would be scary as he could surprise me at any moment. While standing on the bed, my gaze fixed on the door, the handle turned. I felt exhilarated and prepared the knife. As he entered, I lunged forward and struck him in the neck. I can't recall the song playing, but I moved the blade to the beats in the music. It was a lot of fun. The downside of the entire situation was that this person had a substantial amount of blood, which stained the carpet. I keep intending to lay something down to speed up the cleanup process, but like the fool I am, I keep forgetting. I also can't remember if he pleaded for help. There have been so many of them that they somewhat blend together. It's astonishing how many creeps emerge from the shadows when you're searching for them. The following night, I returned to the coffee house, dressed as attractively as possible, hoping to attract the attention of another. Frank texted me to be cautious. You don't want to develop a caffeine addiction, lol. I like to camp, but after my latest trip, I think it won't ever be the same. I pitched my tent on a nice, even surface and gathered some wood for a fire. The night came with its usual nightly sounds, and I relaxed amid the hooting owls and chirping crickets. Even better was the fact that no one else was around. Help. It was subtle. I almost missed it. The voice came from deep within the woods, and for a moment, I doubted what I was hearing. It sounded feminine, but oddly enough, I just couldn't discern. Please help, it continued. I shone my flashlight between the bushes and walked around. To be completely honest, even as an adult male, I was paralyzed with fear. So I did the responsible thing and called the local police. That's when things went from odd to very, very weird. The police told me to ignore it. I explained to them that someone could be injured and probably needed medical attention. But they assured me otherwise. When I kept pushing and asked why, they told me, "Sir, if you ever hear that voice again, ignore it, do not respond, and do not approach." Well, I did hear it again, but I didn't ignore it. It was almost midnight when I heard the voice a second time. I awoke to someone whispering, "Help," and it sounded like she was just outside my tent. I went out to check, and no one was there, but the voice continued from a distance, "Help, please." Again, I grabbed my flashlight and looked around the area I was camping. I was too afraid to follow the voice into the woods, especially since the authorities themselves avoided it. But I struggled morally, trying to decide whether I should go and help this person or listen to the police, who were concerned for my safety. But then I heard another, different voice. This other voice, which also seemed to be coming from the woods, was an octave lower. Unlike the first one, which cried for help, this one was loud and demanding. "Quiet," the other voice demanded. "No one's going to help you." Once I heard that, I was sure someone was in trouble. I called the police again. When I informed them about a second voice coming from the woods, they seemed even more concerned. They told me that I should pack my things and leave the campsite immediately. They said that hearing the second, more manly voice meant that it was getting desperate. They also said that the two voices were coming from the same person. That part was bizarre and confused me, to say the least. It was at this point I dismissed the police in that area as crazy, but not before telling them off. I got angry. I told them that if they didn't get down here to come and check it out, then I would do it myself. I said repeatedly that a woman could be in serious trouble and that it was their duty to help her, but still, they refused to come. All they kept repeating to me over the phone was, "Do not enter the woods, sir." They seemed more afraid than I was. Once I hung up the phone, I heard the voices again. "Gentle, please, somebody help me." And then a growling, quiet. No one's coming. It was a little past midnight at that point. I couldn't live with myself knowing that I had the chance to save someone's life, but instead cowered. So I grabbed some things and ventured into the woods. When I entered the woods, the voices ceased, just like that. No cries, no whispers, and no commands. Even the owls and crickets went away. Nothing but dancing leaves and creaking tree branches. I stopped walking and looked around, a full 360 degrees. "Hello? Anyone here?" I called out. Nothing. "I'm here to help," I continued. "Where are you? Are you okay?" Still nothing. I thought of calling the police again, then chuckled to myself. I found it strange, but somewhat comforting that I didn't find anyone out there. Nonetheless, I was still creeped out, so I packed my things and finally left the campsite. Didn't know why the police, of all people, were so afraid. Worst case, someone was in actual danger, and we've all failed them. Best case, morons who think saying, "Help me" in the middle of nowhere is a great idea for a prank. To be honest, when I heard the voice the very first time, I did think it was a joke. When I heard it the second time, along with that other voice, I became a bit more concerned. And same with the third time I heard it in the woods. But when I heard it again a fourth time, a week after I left the campsite, coming from inside my own house, I became very, very concerned. I woke up as we hit a particularly bumpy stretch of ground. I'm a second-year college student, and I was on a trip with a few of my pals into the wilderness to go camping. It went about as you would expect, and was overall a pleasant experience. Dylan was taking us all back home in his van. There was still a sizable expanse of wilderness between us and the city outskirts, which was why I had fallen asleep. And that's when I noticed him. Outwardly, there was nothing really strange about him. At least not that much. He looked like he could have easily been from our group. But he wasn't, because 5 of us had gone on this trip. I did a quick head count, wondering if I was just drowsy, and counted 6. "So, were you?" I asked him. It was odd to see someone new here, but the thing was that I guessed we had decided to pick up a hitchhiker while I had fallen asleep. Lucy gave me a weird look. "You all right there? This here's Grayson. You know him." I turned to him again, wondering if by some odd chance I did know him, and reached the same conclusion I had earlier. I had never seen this man before in my life. And again, we had done head counts regularly, over and over, because Blake wouldn't let us not do them. It was drilled in my head that it only went up to 5. That's it, 5, not 6. And we did this over and over so often there was no way I could be making a mistake. I opened my phone and went through the pictures I'd taken during the trip. No, there was not even a single sight of him at the edge of any frame, let alone a full-blown photo of him. And the most people in any photograph was still 5. Turned to Lucy and said, "What's with this strange joke?" "What strange joke?" she asked. "Why did you pick someone up? And why are you pretending like he's always been here?" Lucy wasn't really one to joke, but I guess this could have been part of an elaborate prank. Lucy frowned. "Who were you talking about?" "Grayson," I hissed as softly as I could. "I know he wasn't here with us before." "What are you talking about?" Lucy asked. "He was here with us the whole trip." Frustrated, I tapped Blake on the shoulder. "Hey Blake, why don't you do another head count?" "Oh, buzz off. I'm serious," I said. "All right. 1, 2, 3, 4. That was my number. 5 came from Lucy. 6, Grayson said. I glared at him again. I knew I wasn't mistaken. Dylan was driving, but he was the most reliable member of the group, so I tapped him on the shoulder. "What happened, mate? What's the deal with Grayson? When did we pick him up?" Dylan frowned. Bro, he's always been here with us. What are you talking about? Okay, no, they were definitely gaslighting me. Blake actually seemed to remember something. Hey, yeah, Grayson's always been here with us, hasn't he? We both went into the bush together, I remember. I frowned as it sounded like he was saying something, but I then turned to see Grayson's reaction to this. He hadn't said a single word at all. He was just staring out the window as if he didn't have a care in the world. He then turned very abruptly and told Dylan, "Hey, could we stop here? I need to take a leak." Again, Dylan asked, but he stopped the van anyway. Grayson got out, and I saw him turn towards the woods. Maybe he just has an overactive bladder, Blake said. Wait, you're telling me that you stopped before? Oh yeah. Wait, you were asleep, right? Yeah. I had to go in the woods, and Dylan had to too, Blake said. I think I began to understand what had happened. I had fallen asleep, and Blake went to go outside, so they stopped. But then Blake came back with Grayson at that time. And everyone apparently accepted them. Oh yeah, you guys were gone for a long time, Lucy said. My heart started racing as time dragged on. It soon became 10 minutes since Grayson had left us. Should we go and see? Dylan got no further as a howl erupted from the woods around us. It didn't sound like anything I had heard before, rather, a mixture between a grown wolf's and a human infant's cry. And there were more of them. Guys, Lucy said, pointing to a point in the woods where I could make out a pair of orange eyes looking at us before they disappeared so quickly I wondered if it had just been a mirage. Dylan, let's go. We can't leave Grayson behind. Grayson's the one who probably brought those things to us. I said, how come you guys can't see that? Other strange, shadowy figures were there just behind the tree line. I had a feeling that they weren't going to remain behind the tree line for long. Dylan, floor it. This time it was Lucy who screamed, and Dylan started the van. Behind us, I could hear the same strange screams we had heard earlier. We didn't get very far as Dylan stopped. What happened? Blake asked. I don't know, Dylan said. I got out, against my better judgment, and saw that both of our rear tires had been slashed. Grayson, that snake. And then I saw it, coming out from the trees. A creature that looked almost humanoid, but had a wolf's head. No, I think it was wearing a wolf pelt. It let out a scream, and I dashed back inside. What happened? Dylan asked. That thing you guys let join us slashed both of our tires, I said. The cries grew louder around us, and more of the same figures came out onto the road. I'm typing this as fast as I can on my phone. I have no idea what those things are, but they look like they're ready to tear us to pieces. Lucy's a sobbing mess next to me, and to be honest, if it wasn't her, it would likely be me. But I'm trying to hide how scared I am right now. Won't lie though, I think the end is near for us. We can't drive any further. Any bright ideas on what our next move should be? I ain't scared of nothing. That's what I hollered to my brother as I slammed the door to my car shut. Things have, changed since then. I've changed. I recall his smirk, how he handed over my jacket, the way he rattled off an endless list of things I should be scared of. Skinwalkers and witches and werewolves, oh my. He presented each one as reason after reason of why this idea was stupid, saying I still had time to flake out, save face. I remember rolling my eyes, grabbing my jacket from his grasp, sliding into my car, and yelling that I'm not scared before speeding away towards the darkening outline of the mountains. They stood out stark against the setting sun like teeth. Boy, how I wish I listened. I was wrong. He was right. I'm really scared now. Let me back up a bit. It all started about 2 days ago. I was out of my mind, depressed, could barely get out of bed, thought about chucking myself in front of cars, over bridges, off buildings, just dying. I thought about dying all the time. And enough was enough. One of the few friends I had suggested that I try solo camping said it might clear my mind, that the wilderness, the silence, the solitude would do me good. He gave me a list of spots, some more isolated than the others. I decided on the most isolated one, which was about a 3-hour hike from the last campsite far out in the Rocky Mountain National Forest. I remember his face, the surprise, the acceptance. "You sure?" His voice cracked. I nodded, saying nothing. "Okay. I mean, it's a pretty secluded place, especially for a first-time camper." He shrugged. "But then again, it's a beautiful spot. It'll definitely give you some perspective. And the night sky out there is insane." I thanked him and turned to leave. But he spoke up again. "Hey, don't let the forest spook you, okay? A word of advice from a veteran. Don't go out at night no matter what you hear. You might get totally messed up by a bear or lion." The drive up the mountains was strangely soothing. The gently curving roads that wove their way through the trees and up the rocks were exciting to navigate, and soon my mind was eased into a peaceful contemplation. I had decided to forgo electronics this trip, even going as far as securing my phone in my glove box. I wanted to be completely free of all that stuff, able to focus on the now rather than ruminate about the past or fear the future. I would be gone for 5 days and 4 nights, enough time for me to, hopefully, recuperate and reassess my life and what I was doing with it. I soon descended into Estes Park and drove through the picturesque town towards RNP, willing myself not to stay at the Stanley instead. I found the entrance to the park with ease and continued to the closest lot to my campsite. Night was now falling, and I silently cursed myself for leaving so late. I sat in my car for a good 30 minutes before deciding that it would be too risky hiking 3 hours in near pitch black. There were 4 other tents set up in the lot I was at, with room for one more, and soon I had my own tent set up. That night passed comfortably. I was surrounded by chatting, laughing people and unruly, but happy children who ran round and round screaming. A few of them offered me roasted hot dogs and s'mores and beers, and I filled my belly, smiling. I was rolled up in my sleeping bag before the last light from the dying embers faded away. The second night didn't go so smoothly. I woke up late, well rested, but still groggy, and took my time repacking my tent. I hesitated at first, wondering if I should just stay there, but at 3 p.m. another family showed up with proof they had reserved the site. So I gathered my things and set off, and immediately got lost. Navigating by map and compass for the first time and alone is a lot harder than it sounds. And the trees can be misleading, can turn you around, make you think you're on the right path when really you're miles from where you're supposed to be. Instead of taking me 3 hours to get to the site, it took me nearly twice that time, and I was swiftly losing what little light was left in the day. Finally I found the site, but before I breathed a sigh of relief, haphazardly set up my tent, building a small fire in front. It was dark now, and I was jumpy. Every sound I heard was seemingly magnified, every shadow cast by the dim light of the fire. Menace. Spooked, I crawled into the tent and curled up in my bag, trying to will myself into sleep. After a while, I was dozing, about to drift off, when I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a foot crunching outside. My eyes shot open, and I reached for my flashlight, but didn't turn it on. I waited. I heard the sound again. Someone or something was definitely walking around my tent. It sounded like whatever they was trying to be quiet, stealthy. That went on for hours in inconsistent bursts, until I finally decided it was an animal, scavenging for the scraps or inspecting my tent. By dawn, I was dozing again, and the noise had finally stopped. I told myself I would sleep for an hour or 2, giving myself time to rest up. I woke up disoriented, exhausted, and started to panic before remembering I was out camping, and that I needed to start hiking back now. But when I exited the tent, saw that the sun was already setting. To say I was upset would be an understatement. I hesitated for a moment, trying to decide what to do. I wanted to go home. I wanted to leave, see how far I could get out there, but deep down, I knew I'd instantly get lost and probably end up in a worse situation. So, I began collecting as much wood as I could to build a big fire and prepared to hunker down for the night. The light from the sun seemed to disappear unfathomably fast. The third night was, pretty problematic. I sat awake in my tent for hours after the sun went down, waiting. I'd left the fire going for as long as the wood lasted. I know this isn't kosher for camping, but I was improvising and I was absolutely terrified. The darkness around me seemed to crush the light from the fire, making it seem small, pathetic, a tiny candle in a sea of shadows. For hours I sat there, listening, afraid. Finally, I realized I was just being ridiculous, that what I had heard the night before was nothing to fear, that my subconscious, my monkey mind, was just playing tricks on me, keeping me alert for no reason. So I bundled myself up and laid down. And I heard it, softly at first. A footstep, then 2, 3, growing louder, bolder. I sat up and felt my eyes increase to the size of saucers and my breath quickened. What was that? I had to know. I wasn't thinking. I wasn't. I was operating purely off of fear. I heard the noise. It sounded like something running and running around and around my tent. Suddenly, the side of my tent pushed in as if someone was slapping it from the outside. H-E-I. I yelled, scared out of my wits. H-E-I. I'm awake. I'm in here. Tried to stand, tripping myself up in my sleeping bag in the process, and slammed into the front of the tent. Scrambling up, I swiftly unzipped the flap and ran outside with a red-tinted flashlight. I saw a shape scurry away and followed, and there, standing at the edge of the firelight, barely visible, was the silhouette of a person. They were standing with their back towards me. Their arms were hanging in strange positions by their sides, their head pointed straight away from me. I took a step towards them, and a branch cracked underneath me. The sound seemed to startle the person, and they turned their head ever so slightly. "Hey," I said again. "What the heck, man?" And it boiled up, a sound that crescendoed into a scream. It was laughter, and it echoed around me, rattling around in my skull. Ran, leaping into my tent, zipping it up behind me, curling into my sleeping bag, crying. And the world around me exploded, or rather imploded. The walls of the tent shook, like hundreds of hands were slapping it, poking it, punching it. Outside, what sounded like dozens of people running around shattered the silence. I don't know how or when I fell asleep. I think I fainted. Either way, I woke up the next day to a reddish glow encompassing my surroundings. I sat up and ran outside, looking around for proof of what I had heard. But there was nothing, no footprints, handprints, or any disturbance at all. Forget this. Muttered to myself, throwing my things chaotically into my bag. I would leave today, in the dark. I couldn't stay another night here. I was just starting to unpull the tent when I heard it. A sound in the distance, perhaps carried to me by the wind which was picking up around me. Help me. Help me, please. Oh God. Oh God. Help me. I reacted more out of instinct than logic and began running towards the sound before realizing that I, in no way, was in a place to help whoever was screaming. Still, I tried to locate the source of the sound, following the voice for about 30 minutes. "Where are you?" I yelled, looking around me through the maze of trees. "I'm here. Where are you?" Quickly the screams descended into a deep, unsettling laughter. Scared out of my mind, I turned and ran back the way I came. By some miracle, I made it back to my site, grabbed my pack, and uprooted the poles of the tent, thinking that I would just roll it up and carry it back instead of taking the time to fold it neatly and shove it into its bag. Around me, the mountains loomed up like fangs, like I was about to be swallowed whole by a monstrous mouth. As I pulled each pole, the tent fell a little, but it was only on the third pole, about 6, that I realized it wasn't falling fully flat. Confused, I peered into the tent and reeled in horror, too afraid to even scream. There was someone sitting inside, but not just anyone. It was me, sitting there, pallor and bone-thin, a too wide grin plastered on my face. A single droplet of blood rolled down from each eye, which instead of having green irises, were totally, wholly black. Jumped back, tripping over my own feet. Laughter rose up around me, and as I scrambled up, I saw my hand that was not my hand reach out from the tent, followed swiftly by the other, then the head. My face that was not my face looked up at me, still smiling, then laughed again. I screamed, I stood, I ran, and I ran. I didn't even know if I was running the right way. I couldn't even use the sun anymore for guidance since it had almost fully set. I ran without looking where I was going. I kept looking behind me to see if that thing, was following me. I could feel the trees scratching me up, pushing against me like they were trying to hold me back, hold me still until that thing came for me. Suddenly a light flashed in my face and I ran into something solid, something black, something that wrapped around me. I instantly cowered, hiding my face in my hands. Crap. Oh, please God, no, 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 no. I heard my own voice, terrified, shaking. Hey, calm down. It's okay. You just scared me. Calm down. What's wrong? I looked up and into the worried gray eyes of a human face. The face of a middle-aged man, to be exact. He was holding me up. The flashlight he was using lay fallen at our feet, creating strange shadows behind us. I looked back, fearful of what I might see, but there was nothing, only trees swinging slowly in the slight breeze. Hey, he said again. Was that you? Screaming. I came out here to check. Couldn't speak. I was too terrified. Shook my head. Were you camping out there alone? He asked, letting me go and bending down to retrieve the flashlight. I nodded, then began crying. Hey, it's okay. It can be spooky out here. Come on, my car is right over there. He gestured with his head back behind him. I wiped my nose and blinked, finally finding my voice. Who are you? He gazed at me, then turned away. I'm a park ranger, but he didn't resemble one. He wore a sleek black suit, a black tie, and a white shirt. His shoes were shiny leather, not hiking boots. Come on, he repeated, taking my pack and slinging it onto his back. While doing so, his jacket fluttered a bit, and I noticed what appeared to be a Sig Sauer handgun strapped to his belt. Okay, I said, looking back behind me again. How did you find me? He shrugged. Good hearing. We entered a small clearing, and I saw a matte black SUV with tinted windows, headlights flaring, engine idling, parked in the middle of it. He popped the trunk and tossed my bag in as I climbed into the passenger side seat. He got in the driver's seat and asked me where he should take me. Told him the lot number, and we were on our way. After a few moments, he flipped the cubby between us open and pulled out a bag. Corn nuts? He asked, holding out the bag to me. Took it gratefully and started munching away. I licked my fingers and then looked back at him. So, are you really a ranger? He looked at me, then back to the road, but I continued to stare at him, captivated. He looked tired, his wood-colored hair disheveled and dirty from the forest. The SUV suddenly stopped, and the man let out a slow, low breath. His eyes narrowed, looking at me, then back to the dirt trail in front of us. I followed his gaze, feeling fear churning inside me, and there, in the middle of the road, was me. The me that was not me. Its limbs hung limply, as if broken, and that sickly smile was still plastered across its face. It waved. The man looked back at me, then back at the thing that was not me, then back at me. I met his gaze. "I don't get paid enough for this stuff," the man muttered before slamming his foot on the accelerator straight towards the thing. We both felt the impact. The car bounced over the body, and the man kept driving, but around us, in between the trees, stirred into the darkness. Laughter boiled up, manic and persistent. We'd reached the lot in silence, bathed in the first light of the rising sun. The man beside me seemed to be deep in thought, distracted. I was still scared but hopeful that whatever that thing was, it was now dead, crushed by the car, or at least so badly wounded that it would soon succumb. The SUV slowed to a stop, and the man popped the trunk and hopped out. He walked to the back and grabbed my pack as I jumped out. He handed it to me, and I took it, then thanked him for everything. "No problem," he said. "All in a day's or night's work." His lips quivered as if he was about to smile. I turned to leave, but he spoke up again. "Hey." I turned to face him again. "If you ever want to talk about what you, saw or, just talk, call me." He held out a card. Took it and looked down at it. It was matte black and only had a single number written on it. There was no area code. "Fan." I began, but I heard a door slam and looked up. The man was already back in his car. He waved at me, then sped off back the way we had come, back towards that thing. I shoved the card in my pocket, climbed into my car, and left, breathing a sigh of relief. I still haven't told anyone about what happened, even when they asked why I refused to go camping ever again. I just shrug and tell them it wasn't my thing, that I prefer a warm bed and the bustling sounds of a busy city. Every so often, though, I'll pull out the card, my fingers lingering over my phone, wondering if I should call, wondering who the man really was and if he'd really be able to explain what happened to me. At the end of the first semester, my friends and I wanted to go somewhere and rest for a week or two. Luckily for us, winter break is fast approaching. We went up to a wooden house in the forest. This place has a cute little pond, and everything seemed so wonderful and peaceful. Of course, I wouldn't be here if the story ended well. Anyway, it was a girls' trip with Sam, Beth, and me. After the test was over, we went straight to the cabin. This place looks like an ideal winter wonderland, in your own personal backyard. "Hey Aid, we should stop at a store to buy snacks and groceries for the next 2 weeks," Sam said to me. I nodded in agreement. The trip to the store was uneventful. We really don't know where we are. It was Ayrton. The reviews were excellent, and what's more, the couple who owned the place gave us students a discount. Honestly, it makes a lot of sense. So when we arrived at the bungalow on the hill, the couple seemed to be already at the bungalow. They were waiting to give us the keys and show us the way. So when I got out of the car and walked towards the front door, I was surprised to see a young man wearing a navy blue jacket. They never texted me about anyone else giving us ownership in the next 2 weeks. Naturally, I just ignored this and waited for an explanation. As he drove up, Beth and Sam talked about Sam's problems in the car. I don't want to interfere. I'm not as close to Sam as Beth is. I just hope she's okay. My name is Max. My parents couldn't come here to give you a place to stay, so they sent me instead. Sorry for all the inconvenience. He smiled as he walked towards the cabin porch. That guy is so cute, he won't lie. He has a beautiful jawline, striking emerald green eyes, and brown hair. It's okay. Don't worry about it. My name is Adrian, I politely replied, and when the car door closed, he turned his head when he heard the noise. That made me see his Roman nose. It is not extremely important, just something I noticed. Come on, girls, have fun, and don't die, he joked as he gave me the cabin key. And then he left. Is it strange that he left immediately without giving any general advice? I mean, again, doing something for your parents must be pretty awkward. I do not think anything. After dinner, because we arrived late in the afternoon, everyone took a shower and everything seemed fine. So naturally, the following week we were all about snow. I forgot to mention that there is a beautiful hot tub out on the back porch. Going out in the cold, half naked isn't always fun, but with a warm destination and a beautiful view, everything seems worth it. So, for next week, everything seems normal. Or at least for me it is. We just do whatever. I found time to study more. During the first week, we did a lot of things, like watching TV shows, cleaning the kitchen, all that fun stuff. Besides spending time together, we also became closer as friends. It's too good to be true. Honestly. I smiled at the girls. I mean, it's only $500 for a 2-week stay. Come on. It's only been 5 nights at a 3-star motel. I mean, this couple seems really nice. Besides, why think too much? Sam told me, adding that this place must have something special, that's why it's so cheap. Agree with this statement. I forgot about the fact that a guy just left. Then again, the reviews here are extremely good. What can you do or say? Beth smiled. The oven rang. The pies are ready, girls, Beth said happily. She is cooking. I mean, passing a failed semester exam requires having a hobby. RIGHT. I'm going to take a shower because we all need a break sometimes, Sam said. I teased her for saying that. What? You don't like baths? No, Sam, we're actually on a break. Joked, she laughed at my comment and went into the bathroom. Hey, Beth. Yes. What's new? You know that your grades don't determine who you are, right? I looked at her. I knew it was wrong to mention it. She grew up with strict parents and life was about status. I knew it was difficult, but I didn't know what to tell her. Like that. The whole world is not like that. That, and again, she knows that, but not for yourself. Yeah, let's change the subject. What if the two of us explored the cabin and the surrounding forest? We don't have quality time with friends, Beth said. Help. This is going to be fun. I promise. Besides, what secrets are there in this forest? Very good. Just because I saw a cabin about 40 feet from the back porch. I sighed. She still hasn't solved her problem. Put on my sweatpants over my shorts and put on my jacket. Hey Sam, we'll be back in 10 or 20. I shouted. I received no response, although I wasn't surprised. Sam and I have never been close friends. The walk up to the cabin is a bit difficult, but when you look at it overall, it's small and in disrepair. Smell something rotten. It's unpleasant. I looked at Beth and we both nodded. I opened the cabin door. When it opened, a terrible smell emanated. Looked into the cabin and saw a table. I started to feel nauseous. I slammed the door shut and stopped myself from throwing up my lunch. I heard a break-in through the snow. There was another person around. I looked up at Beth. Her eyes were wide, and the pupil in her blue orb looked like a tiny dot in a drawing. I heard the foreigner's footsteps getting louder. I grabbed Beth's hand and ran towards the cabin. I slammed the door and locked it. As I ran, I looked back and saw Max, covered in cold, dried blood. I ran to the bathroom door. Sam, we have to go. Now. I screamed and slammed the door. The lock broke and I opened the door. The only thing I saw was a bathtub full of thin blood and red stains on the tiles on the wall. Beth, Sam's gone. Here, the wall is covered in blood. Call the police. I looked back and saw Beth crying on the floor. Grabbed my phone and called the police. I felt like my whole world was collapsing before my eyes. 911. What's your emergency? We found dismembered bodies in the cabin at the airplane we rented, and my friend was missing. There was blood in the shower water and blood all over the walls. I started to panic. With each word, my sentences became faster and I couldn't breathe. Ma, I need you to calm down. The woman told me. I tried to calm down, and started breathing. What's your location? I gave them my location. I told them the property name. Anything I could to get them here, faster. Just need it here. Okay, the police will be here in 10 minutes. Please wait and lock all the doors until they arrive. When the police finally arrived, they questioned us and looked around. They told us to go home and they would say something about Sam. Someone asked me who I met on that trip. I told them there was a guy. He said his name was Max. He had light brown hair and green eyes. The man, does this man have any notable characteristics? The police officer who was interrogating me seemed annoyed by this. He frowned when asking me this question, and I felt like I was wasting his time. I looked at the ground. I couldn't think of anything else except that he said he was the owner's son and that he had a very structured Roman nose. Bamboo. That's all I know. I'm sorry. I tried to calm down. After questioning, we were asked to go home and leave. Wait. A week later, I was in my room. I didn't go to any classes. They considered it an injury and let me drop out. Yesterday, I received a call from the station. Thank you for calling us right away. We found the body of the owner in this cabin, which you told us about. They were separated and wrapped up. Most likely cannibalism or trafficking. As for your friend, I'm sorry to give you this bad news, but that damn water is really acidic. It's a chemical that will slowly dissolve you. But as for the man, the owner has no sons. Of course you don't know that. We are also trying to find him. I heard a knock on the door. We think he's left town. The person on the phone continued, the lock clicking. So we'll try to see what's going on. At that moment, the door creaked open, light shining into my dark dorm room. I glanced over and saw a pair of striking green eyes. He gently bit my tongue. The liquid was too sour. Its bitter taste startled me when I looked over and heard the gurgling sound of milk coming from the shaggy bartender wearing a t-shirt of the band, The National. I couldn't tell if he was new or not, but his messy brown hair and face told me it was indifference. It's a shame because usually my espresso is delicious when I pass by. It was a pastime of an old friend named Jensen. Overall, he's a nice guy. He had spent the last half hour talking about his work, and I was starting to lose interest. It wasn't enough of a distraction to get out of my head, and the discomfort I was feeling. I hate being in public these days. That's enough about me. What have you done? Jensen asked as he leaned back in his chair and took a sip of coffee that contained too much cream and sugar. I'm surprised how he stays in shape when he drinks so much milk and sweeteners. He looks like he has for years. He was thin but toned, with sandy blonde hair and dreamy blue eyes. I was doing well and went back to school. I needed a new career. Yes, I understand the need for this. How are things outside of work? I asked. As usual, I still hang out with my old group on weekends. They ask about you. Maybe you should hang out sometime. What can I do with you? I asked harshly. I was wondering if you could go out. So how about we go lift weights and then go to the bar like before? I mean, we could do yoga or something. Yeah, my speed hasn't been the same lately, Jen, I replied. It's not like the good old days. I traded my tequila for coffee and my wait for binge-watching shows on Netflix. It was a lifestyle that Jensen could never understand. I'm sorry, man. I've never been the coffee shop type. This seems like a place for hooking up and potentially losing connections to me. Lost connection. His eyes lit up. Have you ever heard of missed connections? Craigslist connections are the best. No, I don't know, I replied, watching as Jensen took his phone back. He seemed almost excited as he typed on his phone. The noise around me started to make me feel uneasy. I imagine everyone is looking at us and wondering what I'm doing with this idiot. But sometimes I'm just like him. He laughed so loudly for a second, I felt like I stood out like a sore thumb. I saw you at the best price, Jensen said loudly with a smile on his face. You were wearing a black baseball cap and gray jeans. I've been dreaming of taking it off since I met you that day. What are you talking about? He smiled. It's the missed connection on Craigslist. This is where people think they have a connection to someone in a public place and post it in hopes that person will see it and contact them. That looks pretty sad, Jen. If you mean sad as well as funny. If you say so, buddy, I said and took a sip of coffee. I looked around for a moment while Jensen continued reading and smiling like a little schoolboy. He put the phone down when it started to bother me. So are you dating anyone? The question annoyed me, but I knew he would repeat it. It had been a while since we'd seen each other, and it was a good question to ask, but my insecurities were starting to surface. Not now, I muttered. You've got to go back, man. Yes, I heard that from everyone. Jensen leaned forward. That's because they're right. We don't want to see you wasting your time being unhappy. My life is a little different now, I answered, looking at him with irritation. It was easy for him to say that. His life has not changed at all. He can do the same things without much effort and without thinking. He knew he had nerve damage. I'm sorry, man. I don't mean anything by that. It's okay. I'm still working things out mentally and physically. Yeah, I'll do that. But I have to go. I'll be late for work, he said as he started to stand up. I tried to follow him but had difficulty and stumbled a bit. I looked into his eyes and saw a look of pity. It took me a while to regain my balance. We started walking out of the store when Jensen started shaking his head. It took a while for him to return. I'm sorry, he said regretfully. It's okay. Just can't move like before. I caught him while we were looking at his motorbike. He still rides the 1000R, and it's still in great shape. It was his pride and joy, but looking at him made my body ache. Jensen smiled slightly and started hugging me. It's nice to meet you. We need to keep in touch, bro, because I miss you. I promise I'll do better. Well, let's start again next week, and you should read some of these missed connections. You will have fun with them. We left and I went shopping. I could feel his little eyes staring at me as I walked down the aisle to get my cereal and coffee. It was an innocent look. He pulled on Mom's pant leg while I tried to bend over to grab my favorite concoction. He must have been over 5 years old, with dark brown hair and small brown eyes that looked at me as I picked up the bag of coffee. Turned to him and gave him a small smile, but I knew it was coming when his mother turned to me. Mom, what's wrong with that man? He asks. She looked a lot like her child, but at that moment her eyes were wide open and her cheeks were red. She looked at her son with shame and turned her back on me. I'm so sorry, she said. It's okay, ma'am. I know he didn't mean anything by that. I reassured her. I grabbed a box of cereal and headed back down the aisle. I tried to pay attention to every step as I walked to the checkout counter. Maybe it was me, but I could feel everyone's eyes staring at me as I stood in line. I needed something to take my mind off of everything, so I followed Jensen's advice. I look at missed connections, but one of them caught my attention. This makes me think that Jensen decided to tease me. I read the title and then clicked. The handsome man I saw at the 8th Street Cafe. You're sitting there with a stupid-looking blonde man. Sometimes you look miserable, and I'm sad to see you like that. I will keep in touch. I picked up the phone and called Jensen to answer my letter. You're such an asshole, but I'll compliment you because I'm handsome. I joked before hanging up. That was the last time I thought about it. I was sitting on the couch wondering what to watch on Netflix when my phone started ringing. It took me a while to get up from my chair and walk to the table where I was charging my phone. I looked to see Jensen answering my call. I picked up the phone and answered. Hello, funny guy. Even though I agree that you are a very handsome man, I still have to ask you what I did. Text about us at the coffee shop. I don't know what you're talking about. Oh, I'm sure it's just a coincidence that you said look over there, and now someone is describing me. Seriously, I'm not. What do you mean when an article describes you? You posted a missed connection on Craigslist, Jensen. No, I haven't. But I wish I could because it would be amazing to see the look on your face, he replied as I walked towards my couch. I relaxed while waiting for my answer. He probably had a huge smile on his face. Good question, but I'm hanging up until you find a better way to lie. It wasn't me. I'm too busy to do anything like that today, and I'm not even that smart. We all have our moments, Jen, I replied, hanging up and returning to missed connections. Jensen will probably delete it now that I discovered it, but something else stands out. That's another one from an hour ago. It was at the store that I met the child who was looking at me. This is for the handsome guy who bought my favorite coffee at Waldron Market. I see you again today. I know you hate when strangers stare at you, but you have no reason to be embarrassed because you are perfect just the way you are. Don't ever feel bad about yourself. I feel so strange. It must be a joke, but I don't see Jensen following me either, because that would require too much commitment. This is starting to make me a little nervous the more I think about it. It was a little scary. The only thing distracting me was the pain in my right thigh. Today I walked more than usual. I decided it was time for a change and tried to stop thinking about strange things. They can't talk about someone like me. Went into my room to get sweatpants and a t-shirt. I undressed and looked at my body. I was once a strong man, but now those muscles have been replaced by ugly scars that run across my torso and lower body. This is the biggest thing that bothers me the most. It was the metal rod and prosthetic foot that created my right leg. They saved my life that night, and several surgeries have kept me active. The only thing they couldn't save was my leg. It took months to get this, and I'm still using it. I run around like a robot in a bad sci-fi movie, and that's why I'm not safe. I scolded the drunk driver who ran a red light and hit the right side of my motorbike. It was a night that changed everything. That night, he stole more from me than just a fully functional body. My phone rang again, and I answered it. Dude, you need to call the police. Jensen was the one who seemed the most nervous. What's going on? I asked, a bit surprised. I stood in my room wearing only shorts and clutching my phone. I'm reading To the Man apartment 124 in Building D. My heart is pounding as I look out my bedroom window. That's the building and my apartment number. It could be a sick joke. Jensen was playing, or someone followed him. I went home. What did it say? It said that while I watched you undress with disgust, I still found you perfect just like you are. How is this possible? Call the police now. I'm coming. He shouted loudly. It's true, said a voice behind me, making me stiffen with fear. I slowly turned my head, trying to stay calm as I dialed 911. It was what was behind that deeply shocked me. I could even feel the phantom pain of my missing leg right before my eyes. A woman with light brown hair stood behind me in the doorway. She has hazel eyes and a sweet face. She looked the same as she did that night, wearing a gray shirt and dark denim jeans. She smiled at me as I tried to regain my composure. It is impossible for him to be here. That night I lost her with my leg. While I was lucky to survive the accident, she did not. I left with a crushed leg, and my girlfriend Holly was trapped under the driver's tire. It crushed her that night. I still remember the sound of his bones being crushed under the weight of the car. What are you doing here? Ask. I don't like to talk about it because I feel guilty about that night. Although I may have lost a leg, the biggest thing I lost that night was her. The thought of his eyes and smile was too much to bear. Just want you to know, even without legs, that you are still perfect to me and that you should never feel insecure. I lived in a 4-bedroom apartment downtown, and after graduating from college, a few Omega Pi Epsilon brothers and I went halfway to a cheap place. This is me, David, even though everyone calls me Trip because I have a third nipple. Okay, not really, but I have a mole near my left nipple that everyone calls my mole. There's Chad, who we call Captain Ahab, because this guy is obsessed with fat girls, Aka whales. Preston, or Little League, got its name because my man slept with a baseball bat in the bed sheets, saying it was for house security. But all he did with it was got drunk and dropped a beer can off the roof. Last is Duke, who is known only as Squirts. Unfortunately for you, the history of this name is classed as Omega Pi Epsilon knowledge. We had just graduated, and neither of us really had the savings or jobs to pay that much. Little League Dad funded it for a while, but he refused to contribute a little more to the bills we shared, so the budget was tighter than a religious girl's ashole. With that said, we've been trying to turn our small apartment into a cute-ish bachelorette. Captain Ahab's brother worked at a bar that was closed, so he gave us some neon beer signs to choose from. I have a ping pong table I bought at Spencer's a few years ago. It no longer lights up but still has a cool neon design. We have a few beanbag chairs that we got from the school playroom when they changed the furniture. The only thing we lacked was a sofa. That's why I turned to Craigslist. I know, finding a couch on Craigslist is a bit difficult, but we're on a budget. I found a few sofas for sale, but they were all ugly granny sofas. When I went to the free page, I found something perfect. Free blue suede sofa. Only about half an hour away. I called the number listed and confirmed it was still available. The man I spoke to was extremely nice. He even offered to bring it to our house since he was planning on bringing it anyway if falls. About an hour later, this big pickup truck arrived. I could see the blue of the couch peeking out from under the tarp. The man I spoke to on the phone introduced himself as Bill and helped me unload it into our living room. Good guy. I gave it a beautiful light for the path. We've had the couch in our living room for a few weeks now. It's quite comfortable, and the blue color matches the blue of the biggest beer brand, which is quite impressive. I'm sure that the next time I bring a chick home, she will absolutely love the atmosphere here. The only problem is now there's this funny smell in our living room. After researching, I realized a bad smell was coming from the sofa. At first I thought maybe it was just the smell of the previous owner's house, but it seemed to get stronger and stronger. It was cold outside, so we turned up the heat. I brushed it off like the different smells of the 4 bachelors sitting up there with their sweaty balls. I'm pretty sure Captain Ahab also deleted the big girl hanging around, so that probably doesn't help. I got as feverish as I could, hoping it would cover up the stench. And it did for a few hours, but then the smell came back, stronger than before. We had a party a few nights ago. Tons of people. There weren't as many girls as I initially expected, but there were a few attractive girls and a few 6s, which quickly turned into 8s after a few drinks. Picked someone who seemed somewhat interested and teamed up with her to play table tennis. Bad call. She couldn't breathe, kept choking, so the other team kept scoring against us, and I was drunk after a few rounds, although the Jaeger bombs in the kitchen afterwards probably didn't help much. I wonder if I can score points with Amanda. Ashley, does it start with the letter A or E, Aaron? Anyway, I'm inclined to think not, because I woke up with my face in a beanbag. When I opened my eyes, drunk, turned around to see Captain Ahab slumped on the bench, his feet resting on his back. Looks like even if I was unlucky, Captain. There was a big dent in the couch, probably from the beautiful whale blubber hitting the cushion. I decided to take a shower. Staggered into the bathroom and took off my t-shirt, shorts, and boxers that read Omega Pi Epsilon Gets It On, Flip Cup Champions 2015, before jumping in and turning on the water. I was the first person, so the water was still warm. It was great, really great, so great that I spent more time than necessary thinking about Aaron, Emma, whatever, who I might have hooked up with. When I go out, I dry my hair with a towel, dry my arms and legs, and wrap it around my waist. I brush my teeth and rinse my mouth, spit water, or look in the mirror if I feel nauseous. I did it. I drank last night's leftover drink. I thought it was mine. It was in my pimp cup. I took a big gulp. Don't judge, a little dog hair never hurts. I then went to the living room, where the captain was sitting lazily. "Hey, big guy," I whispered. "It seems like someone caught a whale last night." "Shut up, Trip." He held his head and groaned. "Oh my God, what the hell is that?" I asked and pointed at his arm, which was covered in red spots. "What?" he whispered, holding her hand or looking. I noticed it on his face too. "Dude, I don't know," he grumbled before standing up. "Free shower." "Yeah, go wash that stinky thing." Laughed before drinking the rest of my drink. I thought there must be detergent or something on the chair that was causing the rash, so I went to see what I could do. It seemed like someone had spilled a drink or two on the mattress, or Captain Ahab had been angry. When I lifted the cushions to see if the covers could be removed for washing, I realized they were incredibly heavy and soaked. I wonder what happened the night before. Maybe we were a little crazier than I thought. When I threw the cushions on the floor, the smell was overwhelming, worse than ever. Looked down at the cushions at the back of the couch and felt nauseous. Dozens of maggots were crawling under the cushions near the gap in the sofa, writhing and writhing on the fabric. Disgusted and full of beer, Red Bull and Jagger, I went to the bathroom and vomited. Cornucopia. Worst thing I've ever seen. I yelled at the captain through the shower curtain, spilled a bottle of Gatorade, "Gotta keep those electrolytes, son," and pulled my t-shirt over my nose. I put the cushion back on the seat and opened the front door. The captain dressed and met me in the living room. Together, we carried the stench out of our apartment to the trash. Halfway there, we heard a thud and the bench became much lighter. Looking at the ground, we smelled something. On the sidewalk of the parking lot, spread out near my feet, was a damned body. We threw the couch away and kept it in the house. I called the police and they couldn't identify the body or why he died. But they didn't say it was murder, more like natural causes. The Craigslist post was deleted and I forwarded the description of the guy who brought the couch and his phone number to the police, even though they said he appeared to be disconnected. After the police left, the captain vomited and said he had to lie down. I'm a little worried about this guy because he's barely left his room these past few days, and the rash seems to be getting worse, even blistering. He also hasn't had health care since his father lost his job last month, and Little League refused to help pay for his hospital stay. Does anyone know what he might have? As I sat there, I was sure I heard voices coming from the door next to the chair I was sitting on. When the guy came back, I asked him about it, and he said it was just his radio playing in the basement. I paid him $15, but he said he needed more. I told him I was out of money, and he said it would only be $15. He was very angry and banged the table very hard. I quickly grabbed the coin and ran out to the car. I got in the car and locked the door. I tried to start it, but remembered the battery was dead. The guy ran out of the house with a gun and shot at my window. He reached for the lock, but I pushed his hand away. That's when I lost consciousness. I woke up in a room full of chains and other weapons. Inside were 2 other people, naked and covered in blood. I panicked and tried to stand up, but was tied up. Luckily, there was a piece of glass next to me, and one of my hands was loosely tied, so I grabbed it and freed my tied hand. Cut the rope around my feet and stood up. I grabbed the gun from the table and went upstairs. The guy was sleeping, so I didn't have to use the gun. I snuck around the house looking for a phone. Finally found one and called 911. When the police arrived, they arrested the principal and said he was a wanted criminal. They unlocked the chained people and took them to the hospital. The police drove me home and I fell asleep. Now, 3 years later, I'm writing this story because the guy is getting out of jail because he pretended it was his friend's house and he didn't know, and somehow the judge believed him. The guy was released from prison on March 1, 2018. I received an email from a stranger telling me to be careful. I feel like I should preface this story with a little disclaimer. I really didn't believe in the paranormal until all of this started happening. To the best of my knowledge, the following stories are accurate and true. At least, I believe that the people involved believe that these facts are real. Take it however you want. I apologize in advance for the incredible length of this story. There are so many details I don't want to leave out. So many crazy things happened. I grew up in a small college town. Summer usually ends and businesses often close until the new semester begins. Many of my family members have and own businesses there. My uncle owns a building located on the main square of this town. Additionally, he owns 2 businesses. Typical college bar and a nightclub that also serves as an event venue for weddings and more. My aunt owns a very nice restaurant on the corner of this block. The 3 businesses are connected and accessible from the 1st and 3rd floors, as well as the large basement used as the kitchen. My uncle, like all the men in my family, is tall and broad. He's definitely not the one to start a fight. In fact, if I remember correctly, he even worked as a security guard for a while when he was younger. Well, child for most of his life, he eventually settled down, opened a business, and made a living there. My aunt and uncle have been in business for many years and have largely managed to maintain a very strong professional reputation. People love them. My uncle likes to joke. My whole family has fun teasing each other. You learn how to develop a thick skin and not be so gullible. So naturally, when I first heard about these cases, I thought he was joking. Rewind about 8 years. Around 2006, I don't remember the first time I heard about bar talk. I remember sitting at the kitchen table at my grandmother's house, a gathering place for my family every time they came to my house. A few weeks ago, my uncle was on his way home from work at the bar and stopped by to see my grandmother. According to her, he was white as a ghost. Fearing that he might have had an accident or that someone had been injured, she urged him to explain what was going on. He said to him, "I will tell you, but you will not believe me." He went on to explain that he was in his office on the square, after work, counting money and calculating salaries. Suddenly, he had the feeling of being watched. He looked up from what he was doing and saw what he described as the man in black. This man was dressed in black from head to toe, black shoes and a black hat. He first noticed his feet, and in reaction, thinking he was about to be robbed, he panicked and bent down to cover the money. When he looked up, the man in black was not there. The bar is locked. He was 100% sure that he was the only one there. There's nothing special about this first story, except that it's the first in a long series of disturbing events. This sounds like many of us have heard before. Please believe me when I say that everyone who met my uncle the next day confirmed that he was telling the truth. He was tense, nervous, upset, and most of all so preoccupied with the fact that his story must have been unbelievable that he didn't focus on the fact that something was incredibly strange. Something strange happened right in front of him. He didn't want to discuss it, and we didn't have much to say after that. I really want to believe this story. I trust my grandmother, and I know she believes it too. We talked about it for a while, and finally let it go. Fall 2006 was my first year in college. I work part-time as a hostess for my aunt when I can. I was busy with school and didn't see my family often, so I asked my parents for anything worthwhile. My dad and I talk on the phone every day as I walk to class. He lived 4 hours away, so he never really bothered with those things. Perhaps a few months after the first incident, he asked me if I had heard about my uncle's new story. I don't know yet, but I'm excited to see what he has to say. The story seemed so ridiculous that he never felt the need to share it with his group. It wasn't until one of them mentioned something to my uncle that something strange happened at the bar while he was taking ice out of the machine. Employees mentioned feeling like they were being watched. He managed to glance over his shoulder and saw what he also believed to be a tall man dressed in black. This surprised him, and he managed to break the lid of the machine. When he turned back, the man was gone. Maybe you can imagine how my uncle felt. He did not tell anyone at work about his incident. The news spread quickly through the ranks, and before long, employees were too scared to open the bar alone and waited outside the front door until someone else showed up with them. The second floor of this building is divided at the top by a long staircase leading up to the entrance. You can continue into the open bar area or go through a large fire door that opens onto a hallway with several spare rooms, a green room and offices. The first room on the left is the makeshift office where my uncle was processing payroll on the first case. If you continue down the hallway, you will come to a door on either side that serves as storage. The room on the right is empty. The furthest room is the green room where reserve groups can prepare. My uncle and a friend were upstairs around noon. The bar is closed. They stopped to chat at the top of the stairs, a few steps from the office entrance. Suddenly, a loud BNG rang out from the direction of the middle room. Another BNG. Suddenly, it got bigger and bigger. They said it felt like things were being thrown against the wall. Naturally, curiosity took over, and they ran to check. No more noise. They opened the door. Nothing. There is not a single piece of furniture in the room. There's no one else to look for. Absolutely nothing, and no explanation. When they returned, confused and a little scared, to be honest, they headed downstairs. Laughter begins. Laugh crazily. In the distance it looked like children, smiling and continuing to walk. My uncle said it looked like two young girls were running around them. They got away with it. What you are doing? What can you do? The news spread to most of the employees. My family knew about it. Other than that, I think they tried their best to keep it a secret. It's too difficult to explain, and certainly too strange to contemplate. Especially if you're the one who has to work there. There's a lot of time to be alone. A whole row of businesses, lots of small storage spaces. I don't want to go up there to visit. Never. One evening my uncle opened the door. It's been a while since anything happened, and I think he just wants to forget everything. The fire door rolled through the hallway, containing the office and additional rooms located on a street that my uncle then closed with a chain lock to prevent break-ins. This door must have weighed more than 600 pounds. It took at least 6 men the size of my father and uncle to move it off the tracks. The fire door had been moved. OFFITSWOI against the wall. It was as if someone had knocked him off the path he was clinging to. It's not necessarily difficult. Enough people can break in and break it. Except the lock wasn't broken. There were no signs of forced entry. Nothing. Calls were made and people came to help move him. At this point, frankly, there are too many bad things going on. Eventually, most people knew about the strange events happening in the square. Luck is not enough to stop doing business, but it is enough to make my family worried. In a last-ditch effort to get information, my father and uncle decided to bring in a vehicle from out of town. None of us ever really believed in psychics. None of them really believe in the paranormal. But as you can see at this point, there's not much left to do. They took her in and showed her around the property. She realized that there were definitely spirits lurking. 2 children died at / near the property, of course, and a man. The man, according to the media, is an evil spirit that only seeks to harm humans. We have all seen this movie. We know how this ends. We also know that it's usually a terrible story and means nothing once the movie is over and the hero has saved the world. They accompanied her to the 3rd floor. The 3rd floor opens to the roof of the neighboring restaurant. My father and uncle considered building a beer garden there. And to take it a step further, as if there wasn't enough information to deal with, they learned that a man running the press was killed in an accident using a printing machine. Awesome. Until now, no one knows about this project. It was just the 2 of them spitting. The medium was wandering around the top floor doing his usual work. She told them she was ready to go down. As they go downstairs, she casually mentions that they should definitely reconsider putting people on the roof. When they asked why, she replied, because the spirits here are very evil and will push someone away. WJJT. I'm pretty sure my dad and uncle were starting to understand what kind of insurance claim they could get in this place if they just lit a match and let it burn. They left there, disappointed and confused. There has never been any strange phenomenon at their restaurant, and the nightclub next door has only had one instance of the temperature suddenly changing from hot to freezing cold. And of course, that happens right in front of the entrance to the neighboring bar. This connecting corridor, which I mentioned at the beginning. Things calmed down for more than a year. Nothing more happened, and I guess my uncle had begun to forget about it, or no longer cared. Like many quaint small towns, Halloween is always a fun time to take a haunted tour of the area. Every town loves to tell a spooky story so much that it puts it on the map this time of year. The city reached out to my uncle to be added as one of the stops. He agreed, and for nearly 3 years, people came during Halloween season with virtually no incidents. How convenient that these ghosts decided to hide out on the scariest night of the year. People are starting to agree that maybe it's all just an exaggeration. Everyone's gone. The staff don't mind going alone, although I sometimes go alone if I have to pick up something for an organized event. Around this time, we were now in 4th grade. I was still in school. My family went into town to visit me. My brother is in high school, and we have a good friend who is a photographer in town who takes senior photos. So my parents took my brother to take pictures of his elders. That weekend, my dad and brother went to the bar to visit my uncle. They installed a service elevator in the back to take the wine to the 2nd and 3rd floors. My brother was curious and wanted to take the elevator down. I want to know what's down there. And strangely enough, after all this time, in the town where my dad and his siblings grew up, NOBODUI knew there was an extra floor behind that building. No one knew it was a small variety theater. No one knew there were old dressing rooms and boxes of props and costumes there. And the most amazing thing is that no one knew that this theater had burned down in a huge fire. My father, my uncle, and my brother discovered all these objects by looking through them in the dark. They collected what they could, and after further investigation with the Historical Society, they learned about the fire and decided to donate all of these items to the courthouse where they were holding an exhibition. In addition to this theater, they also learned that an old town journalist was located on the 2nd floor of the bar, where they heard stuff being thrown everywhere. A paranormal TV show, similar to Ghost Hunters, contacted my uncle and asked if they could stop by the bar and film for a night. He welcomes them, but makes it clear that he does not want to stay there with them. Having arranged everything, he locked them in the house and went home in the evening. It wasn't yet midnight when he received a call from the group saying they had had enough and wanted to leave. They never stayed to record anything, and the bar never appeared on the show. This was the last straw. My uncle withdrew from the annual ghost tours and stopped discussing the events. Few years passed without any incidents. Life goes on, and we all forget about it. I guess it would be easier to pretend like nothing ever happened. Until the end of last year, 2013, my dad received a phone call from my uncle. At this time, my brother and I had both graduated from college and moved away. My parents moved out west. Rarely visit this small town, maybe once a year. My uncle is busy renovating his business. The local pharmacy closed, and my family bought the space. My uncle is dividing the basement into apartments and preparing to convert the pharmacy into usable commercial space. Being a small town, he had to hire a good electrician from outside the area to rewire the entire building. The electrician was from a larger town about 2 hours away and was not local. My uncle put it in the basement and went back to the bar where his office was. The electrician is doing his job. Not long after, there was a knock on my uncle's office door from the electrician, who was now as white as a sheet of paper. When asked what happened, the electrician explained that he was repairing the lighting system when the power suddenly went out. Without thinking much about it, he walked towards the bottom of the basement stairs, where the light switch was, turned it back on, and went back to work. The lights went out again. He took the flashlight out of his toolbox, but when he got up to turn it on, he saw someone and quickly tried to hit her. He thought he was about to be attacked. After throwing a punch, he opened his eyes. There he was, and the character he describes is a tall man dressed in black. The electrician quit his job that day and told my uncle to find someone else. This is not a fabrication for my entire family. These are true stories that caused my uncle and aunt a lot of mental stress. This affected the business both positively and negatively. But eventually, something inexplicable happened multiple times and made us all seriously question our beliefs. Me. I can say with certainty that I will never set foot in this building alone again. If my uncle can sell the house, he will. My brother and I, tired of living together in an apartment, decided to hit the road. Being Midwesterners, we decided to head west, and after loading some supplies into my brother's truck, we hit the highway. Our curious and hopeful minds, we stopped several times, always at roadside restaurants, bars, and similar places frequented by other tourists. We wanted to absorb as much of the regional culture as possible, using both the facilities themselves and the people who passed through them. My brother was especially keen to celebrate these cultural exchanges and often interviewed people we met casually and politely. Offer them a beer, a dessert, or sometimes even a few dollars in exchange for their stories and thoughts. Most agreed, many of them enthusiastically, and only a few rejected the offer outright, in one way or another, in response to my brother's sometimes overly cordial attitude. Always listened from the sidelines, rarely engaging in real dialogue, but offering my own kind gestures and wordless smiles. We only entered a few towns over the course of several hundred miles, not wanting to stay in one place too long. The desire was mainly due to the work relationship we both had at home. The first 3 towns we visited were all small and quiet. Though simple, the community depends on a single industry, which employs most of the able-bodied city residents. These businesses make up the majority of conversations expressed by townspeople. Their lives and blood are tied to them in one way or another. My brother listened with kindness and respect to all who were willing to speak, but we did not linger in these places. I grew quickly. hungry for new and diverse stories. We should have been halfway, but it ended up being the last leg of the trip. We passed through a town not far from the highway, and very similar to other towns in general layout, as well as its aesthetics. We could have gotten away with it because we had accumulated enough knowledge and experience in such places. But we were terribly hungry, and my brother's mood always dropped significantly when he was hungry. Turning off the highway and following the empty, tree-lined road, we made it for a few stops until a sign told us the town ahead was nearby. Before entering, we stopped along the way so my brother could go to the bathroom there and not have to do it in town. We just wanted to grab some food, in a to-go box, if possible, and get back on the road, looking forward to continuing our journey and exploring more interesting places. Once within the city limits, which was about as normal as one would expect in a small, close-knit community, we quickly found a restaurant, and I hurried to take my already worried brother. "Put yours inside." We were welcomed, sat down for coffee, and promised that our food would be brought to us as quickly as possible. Sitting in red leather booths, near windows overlooking the main street, on which men and women dressed in somewhat classical outfits sat, stood, or walked, we discussed destinations in the future and recount our favorite places to date. The plan now was to request some kind of to-go box a few minutes after our meal, so we wouldn't seem too rude if we just packed up and left immediately. We thought we could afford a few minutes in the city, give its citizens some opportunities to impress us. I'm sorry, these are my words. I gained an undeserved air of pride after only visiting a handful of seemingly similar cities. When the food arrived, I quickly realized that we would be staying longer than expected. I ordered the country omelette, which promised a large 3-egg omelette stuffed with French fries, sausage, onions, and a wonderful sauce. It comes with 3 buttermilk pancakes and as much apple or orange juice as anyone could ask for. My brother ordered breakfast, which included sausage, bacon, scrambled eggs, toast, and unlimited free juice. When my hot, heavy plate was placed in front of me, all thoughts of hastily and rudely leaving the small town vanished. Glancing at my brother, I saw similar thoughts vanish from his face when he saw the equally sumptuous meal. The food looks amazing and tastes even better. I consider myself a casual breakfast connoisseur, and I can say with absolute certainty that this meal was the best I've ever had and the tastiest thing I've ever eaten. Despite the horrifying and nightmarish experiences that followed, I will always remember the delicious, creamy omelette brimming with meat, sauce, and onions, perfectly fresh and sweet juice. The pancakes were warm and buttery. We finished eating, and without thinking about leaving, right away, we decided to explore the city, hoping to escape the calorie overload and avoid falling into a coma. We still wanted to leave that day. We arrived around noon and thought a brisk walk would stave off any food-related drowsiness. Parking in front of the restaurant, we walked along the main road, greeting everyone as we passed. Many were as cordial as people in any other town, and in a lighter mood my brother conducted his usual interviews with those who wished to talk to us. We received and encountered more or less the same small-town stories, opinions, complaints, and oddities, even though everyone in this particular town seemed to have a talent for speaking in public in a special way. I do not mean to say that the inhabitants of the earlier towns were illiterate, or that they spoke in a crude or stupid manner, but that these people seem to have maintained their education and learning in English regardless. What is their profession? Occasionally they use slang, drawled accents, but all of the things that usually give off a regional dialect, seemed rehearsed, staged for effect or staging. My brother also noticed this and pulled me aside after the 6th interview and said, "It looks like these people are quoting lines." I accept and express my above observations. With our interest now piqued, we continued walking, looking for more people to interview, hoping to discover the reason for this seemingly citywide underrepresentation. Unfortunately, many side roads and alleys have been closed, something to do with a long-awaited construction. Our exploration was largely limited to the main street lined with businesses, and a few lots and spaces where children played or simply strolled. Oddly enough, even the children have an authentic voices and a strangely fluent way of speaking. It's not scary at all, and in the case of kids, sometimes it's even more endearing, but I quickly found myself scared. Everyone was kind, friendly, almost willing to actively comply with my brother's impromptu interviews. And that, for some inexplicable reason, destabilized me. As time passed and our bloated bellies subsided, we found ourselves surrounded by a procession of marchers. Each individual offered a newly remembered, or perhaps newly invented, anecdote for my brother to record in his travel memories book. Never before have we had such a large audience, such positive attention from the people of the city. Back in the car, we thanked everyone for their generosity in conversation, and politely but firmly signaled that we were taking no more answers as we closed the car door. The crowd, now about 20 people, had dispersed. Each person returned to their original position along the main road. Sitting in the car, the radio turned loud enough to leave us in a blanket of sound, but not loud enough to disturb the peace. We scanned the answer. As we looked through the responses, I noticed that my brother was clearly troubled by something, but he didn't say what. His eyes scanned the pages, and after a moment of speechless contemplation, he finally said to me, "You would say we interviewed 20 or 30 people, wouldn't you?" I nodded, clearly remembering how many people surrounded us, almost shouting their life stories at us. "Do you remember their profession?" I recall out loud the everyday positions: gas station owner, businessman, police chief, florist, doctor, etc. Do you find anything strange about this list? After thinking for a while, I admitted that I couldn't think of anything out of the ordinary. His attention returned to the list again, and this time he turned to a blank page, then began copying information from previous pages onto that page. As he did so, I looked around the car and noticed a few townspeople looking at us, not in a threatening or strange way, but always close by, unashamedly. "Okay, let me know if you notice anything wrong with this list. Missing something." I read the list. Store owner Ernest, Sheriff Dorothy, florist Quentin, chef and restaurateur Abigail, waitress Ruthie, worker tailor and clothing retailer 444 for Argyle, gas station owner Lance, doctor and veterinarian. I read the list twice and then handed it back to my brother, shaking my head in confusion. He sighed and pointed at the windshield and said, "There are a few spots missing from this list. And I'm not talking about what we would be used to in a city. I wouldn't expect to find a bartender, vintage record store owner, or vape shop employee here. There's nothing like it. But we interviewed almost every adult in this town, and not one of them had a job that involved death." Looking at my brother's serious expression, not wanting to puncture his rude theory, I gently placed my finger near Lance, the town's doctor and veterinarian. Both positions, by their nature, are associated with death, perhaps predicting I would challenge his theory. My brother smiled, a serious, almost melancholy smile. "Doctor, at least a good doctor, will prevent death. And yet, in a place like this, any serious life-threatening illness is likely to require the insight and cooperation of an out-of-town specialist or surgeon. I bet this particular doctor is no more familiar with death than the florist. What you don't realize is that this town, for some strange reason, has no undertakers or any kind of undertakers, gravediggers or caretakers, and pathologists. Although I suppose in theory the doctor could do the autopsy himself, if he so wished, quite skillful." I tried to think of a suitable rebuttal, an explanation for the absence of such posts, even refuting the idea that we simply haven't encountered yes, but my brother assured me that we had met every working adult in the world, city, and that none of them ever mentioned performing mortuary or grave functions. An air of mystery seemed to surround the car as I processed this discovery, and I found my eyes drawn to the still staring townspeople. My brother also looked at them, and at a glance I saw his eyes filled with worry, even real fear. After a moment, he said, lowering his voice even though the music was playing again, "I think we should leave. I feel like we should definitely leave before dark." But I had to ask them something. I needed it. Agreed with this opinion and helped him collect notes in his file. Buckling our seatbelts, we drove slowly down the street, following a man who had not moved since returning to his position near the general store. Lowering the window, I called the smiling man closer. Leaning back in my chair, I let my brother ask, meanwhile, looking at the other residents of the town, who continued to watch us attentively and motionlessly. Conversation. "Hello, sir. I just have one more question, if you don't mind." "Of course not, son. How can I be helpful?" "Well, I know this sounds strange, but I was wondering if you'd mind taking us to the town cemetery. My brother here is an aspiring artist, and his latest muse seems to be cemeteries and other solemn places." As he spoke, he squeezed my thigh behind the door, signaling me to accept the lie. Smiling, I confirmed the story by saying, "If I choose to depict any part of your city cemetery in my artwork, I will of course do it tastefully, with the greatest respect and reverence for those buried there." For a moment, the man was speechless and looked at me and my brother with confusion. His face showed deep disbelief. Then, suddenly, his face changed, and he took a sharp breath, as if I were coming to a great discovery. "Ah yes, death. Death. This is something we have forgotten." Ah, thank you, children. In our rush to fit in and perfect everything, we have forgotten to establish this final and bleak status of humanity, death. Well, let me be the first to show it in our city. Stunned by his words, none of us could move, and so we were forced to witness the terrible nightmare of the man's sudden and deliberate destruction. His normally plump and olive skin quickly became saggy and gray. Then, for some unknown reason, it fell off in large piles of flesh, revealing the crimson and rosy muscle underneath. This layer also falls piece by piece, and we got to see the organs, bones, and most internal parts of the human body. When all the flesh and tissue had left, the skeleton, animated by a force beyond nature, raised its arms as if more fully present, then, with the remaining refuse, collapsed onto concrete. The wreckage that had once belonged to a man then underwent a frighteningly rapid period of decomposition, becomes a puddle of semi-liquid slime within seconds. Near the site of supernaturally rapid decomposition, I was subjected to the stench emitted and forced to silence my screams, which began with the skinning, to prevent me from inhaling and tasting the poisonous gas. Breathing heavily, eyes glued to the road ahead, my brother pressed hard on the accelerator, sending the car hurtling down the road toward a blocked intersection, where he probably intended to turn around and go back freeway. As we ran down that street, I watched other townspeople walk on the sidewalk, and then each, horribly, push themselves into similar self-destruction. Some disintegrate more quickly than others. Their bodies turned into crimson clouds, sending chunks of human flesh that smashed into our windows. Big pink rockets leave tracks and marks. Cried so loudly and unrecognizably as my brother continued on his way in silence, eyes glued to the road, unwilling to look left or right at the horror unfolding. We reached the highway safely, unharmed. Our car only had superficial blood stains, but I will never forget. I will forever be haunted by the horrifying moment that came, that last suffocation. Even when everyone in the city had quit smoking, stinking on the sun-dried concrete, I could still hear them chanting, in hoarse voices, "Die, death. We must not forget death." If you're loving these stories so far, could you click the subscribe button below? It's free, and you'll get to enjoy more scary stories from me. I live in a small town of about 1,000 people. Everyone knows everyone, and most of them are very nice people. I don't find this strange since most small towns are communities. There are 5 businesses in this town: a gas station, a restaurant, 2 bars, and a new butcher shop opening in town this year. Everyone loves the meat there, and it's a great price you can't go wrong with. It was a Friday evening, about 11 p.m., and I saw police lights on the outskirts of town. A terrible accident occurred when 2 power line repairmen were electrocuted. Their charred bodies lay motionless under the power lines. The police were the first to leave because after getting detailed information, they ran away. The ambulance had not yet arrived as it had to come from another town more than an hour away. Only one man wearing a bloody white apron stood out in the darkness, bending down to look at the bodies, and that's when I realized it was the butcher, Mark. I quietly looked outside, wondering what he was doing. Does he know the boys? Are they friends? Family? All these thoughts ran through my mind. Then I saw him. He took out a hunting knife from his pocket and began cutting large pieces of meat from the charred bodies. I rubbed my eyes because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He stopped looking around and started hiding pieces of meat near a nearby bush. After a few minutes of cutting most of the flesh out of the body, there wasn't much left but bones. I couldn't look any further because I was so afraid he would see me. He then moves like a creature, but very fast, like a hunchback zombie 28 days later. Very quickly, he passed by me and left. I went home scared, trying to come to terms with what I had seen. I didn't sleep all that night. The next day, I was curious and had to go see if the stones were still hidden under the bushes. When I arrived, I saw a yellow crime scene tape wrapped around power lines, and the bodies were gone. I walked to where I saw him hiding the body, and it all disappeared. Only blood remained, and it seemed he was leaving a trail leading to the forest on the outskirts of town. I followed the trail as best I could before it got cold. I have to find out what happened to the meat. Did the butcher turn around and make it look like an animal did this? Did an animal or creature do this? I should have stayed and watched longer. I had to know, so I walked past the parked butcher shop and watched for a few hours. Just saw normal customers coming and going. I decided to go home and take a nap because I couldn't rest after this whole situation. I had a terrible dream, Mark. The butcher was in it. He cuts up human bodies and makes steaks, burgers, etc. from them. He was in a bloody mess, and he tied me up and said, "Now you know my secret, that you will become human flesh." I woke up in a cold sweat. Thank God it was a dream. But was it a sign? Is everyone in town, including me, a cannibal? Is that why it offers the best prices in the state for red meat? I wonder. I have to get to the bottom of this matter. I took the next day off work because I thought I needed to know what was going on. This all feels like a nightmare, and I still haven't woken up. But I know what I saw and how that night Mark ran like something not of this earth, like some kind of code in the human body. No matter what, it must be stopped. I went back to the butcher's and saw that it was closed for the week, which was strange. Tried to intervene even though I knew it was wrong, but I knew something was wrong. It was an old warehouse, and in this small town with very little crime, no one had an alarm. I grabbed the ladder at home and climbed onto the roof, looked around and found a possible passage through the air duct. It's a commercial scale system, large enough that I had no problem walking down the aisle. It smelled so much like death that I gagged a few times before I started walking. Then I broke through and fell 15 feet, gasping for air. I don't want to breathe in the meat locker. Saw the horror I had imagined. 2 police officers and a paramedic were hanging upside down, with pools of blood underneath them, their throats slit almost to the spine. They smelled bad, as if they had been there for a while. The bodies were expressionless. Then I heard a door and a strange growling and howling sound. I ran and hid behind a bunch of crates, Fear is taking over my body, because I don't know what will happen. Bursting through the door, Mark acted strange and made animal-like noises as he hobbled quickly toward the bodies. I was worried. If he found me here, I would probably be dead. He began sawing off the bodies limb by limb, throwing only the heads, arms, and legs into a black plastic bag. Then he started tasting raw meat. I almost vomited when he made noises like a gluttonous creature eating leftovers. Then he started grinding the meat in a hamburger grinder, wrapping it up and putting it in the freezer. I didn't know how much longer I could stand it. His eyes were black and there was blood everywhere. He acted very strangely, and eventually he left the room. I heard other tools grinding, cutting, chopping in the next room. Now is my chance to find a way out. Hell, there's only one way in and out, so I'll have to stay until he leaves without being noticed. It's been a few hours. It's finally quiet. I haven't heard anyone leave. Trembling with fear, I crawled out from behind the crates and made my way to the front door. I crawled as slowly as I could, and I still couldn't hear anything. I slowly pushed the door open, peeking into the dark storefront. The coast seemed clear, so I decided to run towards the front door. As I did so, I noticed out of the corner of my eye a person with pale white skin. He started growling. I ran full speed towards the front door and crashed into it. The glass broke. I was cut everywhere, bleeding and almost unconscious, when I heard something coming towards me from behind. It looked as if it came from hell. I cowered and staggered out to call for help, but it was 2 a.m. and no one was there. I started running as fast as I could down the street. Looking back, I saw Mark squirming, hunching over, making horrible noises as he started running towards me. Then I saw a man on the porch waving at me. It looked like he had a gun and pointed it straight at me while yelling not to move. I raised my hand to say something was chasing me, but when I turned to see where Mark was, he was gone. While trying to explain, the guy called the police without taking his eyes off me. The gun still pointed at my chest. Then, out of nowhere, that man was tied up and torn to pieces. It was Mark. I took the opportunity to run away. I got home without looking back, walked to the front door and rushed inside, took a bag full of clothes out of the house, got in my car and left as quickly as possible, without looking back. I left the state, leaving everything behind. It's been 6 months since I left. I scoured the internet for this small town to check on the status of things, and in just 6 months since I left, this small town was completely wiped out. The unsolved disappearance of an entire city. It has been abandoned and is now a restricted area. I had to get away. As a passenger looking out the window, life was sort of dragging along its own routine. Declining an early lunch greeting to the most Instagrammable bistro in my city, I chose rather to escape town for some time. I wasn't feeling it of late, yet fortunately I had a sensible fix. With a long end of the week in front of me, I felt that booking a lodge in the forest may be exactly what I wanted. I needed to get into nature before it was excessively cold, and perhaps get in some climbing. I wanted to be able to get away from the internet, read a book, or listen to music while sitting by a big fire. I figured that could cause me to feel like an individual once more. I was doing some quests to a great extent, and at last tracked down the ideal spot. It was only a couple of hours north of the Twin Cities. I live around Minneapolis, and the lodge looked astonishing. All things considered, I shouldn't actually call it a lodge. It seemed to be an upscale house. It was planned in a cutting-edge style, however with a provincial and simple feel. Felt like I had struck gold. Since it wasn't exactly the high season anymore, it gets cold pretty right off the bat in northern Minnesota. It was really accessible at an appealing cost. However, it wasn't all luck that had enlivened my examination. I had actually been there with my family when I was a kid. I had affectionate recollections of the town as well. It was an enthusiastic, yet still exceptionally nearby spot. A decent proportion areas of strength for a local area that invited the Fairweather Lake Lodge proprietors. At any rate, that was my memory of it. For hell's sake, for the nature of this house and its value, I would have looked at half as 12 different towns that are genuinely horrendous, evaporated places. This is absolutely sufficient. I investigated the posting for around 10 minutes before I affirmed the booking, and made good my charge card number. I got an affirmation very quickly, as well as a decent mechanized note from the posting proprietor. Could tell that this was a professional vacation rental because of the few belongings that were displayed in the interior photos of the house. It was one of those, the keys to the spot are in this secret spot. If it's not too much trouble, set them back there and clean up before you leave sort of arrangements. Since my reservation was for that Friday, I figured I'd be prepared and could take the afternoon off that day to drive straight there from the office. I pressed the typical end of the week stuff, in addition to a few climbing stuff and some random setting up camp stuff into my dependable car. Before I wrapped up on Thursday night, I ensured I had all my crisis side of the road supplies. I'm not precisely a Judgment Day prepper, yet I really do comprehend that the forests are nature, and nature is capricious. The response, get ready. The drive up was peculiar. Was happy to avoid the standard Friday heavy traffic, yet zooming out of the urban areas so handily brought me into this odd half-rural, half-field climate inside an hour or so of takeoff. There's this sort of dull acknowledgement of innovation that is by all accounts unavoidable. I felt a disquiet all through this part of the drive. The inclination arrived at its peak when I passed an enemy of fetus removal bulletin emerging from a tree line, woodland on one or the other side. A powerful message to no one in an area where neither the message nor the structure that carries it belong. It was somewhat of an omen of these terrible towns I cruised by. Quite a few people of them appearing to stay alive by prudence of nearness to a significant throughway, as it were. Puts alive outwardly, yet empty at their center. This feeling was almost confirmed when we stopped for gas and groceries on a main street that was empty. An alcohol store was open, however, so I got a container of bourbon as well. The road was then returned, when my voyaging had taken me off the throughway and onto a fairly twisty Province street, driving me to another, much twistier district street nearer to my objective. Things got, with way less individuals around. I felt like it was as of now not unsavory to turn my music far up. Even on a Friday, it was simple to pass the time on a road with only one lane and no other vehicles traveling in either direction. Invigorating as well. Once I was on this route, a few hours of driving really vanished, and it wasn't until early evening before I reached the town. It took somewhat longer than I remembered to get out there, yet I wouldn't fret. From each sign that I could gather as I showed up, the town of Dodenba was getting along nicely. There were merry individuals strolling about the central avenue, halting and talking with one another. Nobody looked as though they were in a narcotic daze, and the structures were all around kept up with. My pit stop and that billboard's decrepit, unsettling atmosphere vanished, and I was replaced by an infectious optimism. Boats were towed behind people returning from fishing at the nearby lake, or nicer, more recent automobiles were parked outside the few watering holes scattered throughout the small town center. My objective was on the opposite part of town, so I needed to pass directly through the principal drag to get to the little street that would take me to my lodge. The guide I was sent after I had affirmed my booking showed that the property was really neighboring a state nature save, which was extraordinary information to me. It was far away, but if I had brought a bicycle, I could probably ride it into town. I took in the sights as I drove slowly. I had a major moronic smile all over until my eyebrows collapsed themselves into a hard wrinkle. Right as I switched off the central avenue, I passed by an old shop that seemed as though it had a place in a spooky form of the sure from center earth than it did in a flourishing little town like this. It was a two-colored, one-story rambler with a gray, sunken porch in the front and ratty Confederate flags strewn throughout. The banners all alone were disturbing to see. However, this was simply good to beat all of a home. An open doorway that led into a dimly lit, eerie hallway was framed by the porch. It was open air and easily warm outside. At this point, from the dark smoke overflowing out of a dry line stack on the rooftop, I could perceive a fire was going. The sign over the entryway read, Cassie's Corner Store, yet a sign on the entryway, open totally, expressed KEPAUT. Not the most inviting. Both earned and weirded out by the uncommon sight of hillbilly rubbish in a blue state, I moved along rapidly, based on the information I had received. Finding the cabin was not difficult. I showed up at the house and recovered the keys from the clearest counterfeit stone I'd at any point seen. The true unconcern for security here provided me with a liberating sensation. In the event that this exceptionally pleasant house could sit on this extremely decent slope while being truly helpless against any prowler, regardless stay immaculate, I'd presumably be acceptable for the end of the week. I entered through the front entryway and was right away shocked by the sheer excellence of the spot. The light impeccably projected a blend of comfortable orange gleam over the prevalently wooden completions, with the differentiating shadows making perky examples on the floor. Furthermore, wall. I smiled to myself and put my things down to investigate. The fundamental entry opened up into a sort of hall, which prompted an extremely open kitchen and lounge area on the right. On the left was an open-to-front room, and by the left wall there were steps paving the way to several rooms and an office. This spot could undoubtedly house 5 to 10 individuals. However, it was all mine this time. I started to notice small details that showed an unexpectedly high level of craftsmanship as I toured the property. There were hand-cut moldings and custom woodwork all over. Nothing seemed, by all accounts, to be pre-created. In my adulthood, I had just leased lofts, modest ones from jerk landowners, typically, and just at any point had IKEA furniture. Encountering this lodge resembled being in an outsider land. I sat in one of the seats, and my body just liquefied into it. The solace of this seat was dumbfounding. An ideal fit. Whoever set up this house had given the greatest amount of consideration to everything about. I was thankful for it, kicking my major advantages over the hassock and absorbing it. It was so agreeable, as a matter of fact, that I became worried about nodding off. I anticipated that I would have ample time to explore the remainder of the cabin later that evening. For the time being, I truly needed to get a feeling of the encompassing area and the state nature safeguard, only noticeable in the patio. I could enter the state preserve by walking straight for the tree line from the back porch, according to a neatly arranged laminated property map on the kitchen counter. The way to that patio was straightforwardly behind the lounge area. As a result, all I had to do to see this path was look to my right from where I was standing in the kitchen. Through the delightfully outlined glass wall that the lounge area was settled into, I could see both the patio, the tree line, and a light way in the grass prompting it. Tossed on my climbing shoes, got the keys, my container of water, and a compass, and headed out the secondary passage. I took in the air as I trotted over the soft grass. It felt perfect. The sun was sparkling warmth on a generally cool and lively day. A boatload of pressure liquefied off my shoulders after even only a couple of steps. Understanding this, I pondered for what reason being in a spot like this gave me such a lot of help. Musingly, now that I had burnt through such a lot of energy getting over here, alone, I sort of wished I had somebody to stay with me. I certainly esteemed the isolation. However, it struck me when I understood that without precedent for some time, I needed another person to be near. It was somewhat of a decent difference in pace, mindset-wise. Thought about a couple of individuals I could have raised here. However, I questioned they could reproduce a similar mentality I was in. Perhaps it was the manner in which individuals on the Central Avenue I had gone through were associating with one another. individuals from various phases of life, and sort of different for northern Minnesota, were coexisting with one another. This was a local area, and individuals thought often about one another over here. You could see it in the manner old structures were kept up with, very much like you could see it in how the more youthful occupants treated the old folks. I was pondering this pretty eagerly when I understood that I was totally encircled by trees. Kicked myself somewhat, and noted to myself that nobody realizes that I'm over here, and that losing all sense of direction in the forest inside 100 minutes of nightfall is an ill-conceived notion. I looked behind me, and could see the initial where I entered. About 50 feet away, it was. Actually look at my compass to see that the opening was squarely in the center of the south and southeast pointers. Presently, in the event that I got somewhat convoluted, I essentially knew whether I fundamentally traveled south I would be alright. Checked out the forest also. There were a lot of conifers and only a few shrubs in this older forest. This made for simple strolling in the daytime. It was astounding for me, nonetheless, how dull it was here from the covering. However, all of the daydreaming I had quite recently done assisted my eyes with changing. When I heard it, I was taking in everything and checking to see if there were any nice clearings or cool trees to look at. ****. As I turned my head toward the sound, I saw a shadowy figure dart through the trees. I worried a little as the sensation of being observed gradually crawled over me. In a situation like this, you always have to make an odd choice. Generally, this sort of occasion is good for nothing. Living creatures will generally stay in a state nature protect. In any case, being distant from everyone else in the forest means generally an opportunity of his being destroyed by a crazy killer with nobody truly knowing. I have observed that the best game plan is to attempt to affirm the pointlessness of the timberland sound without expanding weakness to crazy killers. In addition, the shadow and sound appeared to be at least 100 yards away. The only reason I heard it was because the woods are typically very quiet, and it was too far away to see. I strolled somewhat further along, calculating my head to get a superior view while keeping my ears open. Despite the fact that I continued letting myself know it was nothing, I could gradually feel my pulse expanding as the blood siphoned more earnestly in my ears. I thought back south, towards more prompt security, yet all at once continued to push ahead. Gradually, and with every stride, my anxiety and sensations of being watched expanded. ****. I heard one more sound followed by some stirring, this time a whole lot nearer than 100 yards away. Dark shadow dashed through certain bushes before me. My heart began dashing and my hips were at that point going to run when the shadow leapt out before me and handled its 4 grimy paws on a wrecked log only 5 feet from where I was standing. It was a canine. Medium-sized, dark, shaggy canine. I got it as a Labcho blend at that point, and I don't think the speculation was distant. I moaned help and giggled to myself. The canine, gasping and grinning with its tongue out, positioned its head at a point considering what I was chuckling to myself about. Asked, bending over, "Hey buddy, where'd you come from?" Connected my hands, and accordingly it grunted to itself, and raised up a bit. It sort of beat its little paws in the soil and gazed up. It yelped once at me then, at that point, turned and began to leave. It took a couple of steps prior to sitting on its hindquarters. Glancing back at me, "You maintain that I should follow you, huh?" said as I moved forward a little. The shaggy mutt again yelped only a single time, practically an endorsement, and proceeded with, I decided to follow him for a while because I could tell he was excited. Whoever's canine this was most likely realizes the forest well. Basically, I trusted. I didn't see a collar, yet the probability of a real wanderer having the option to make do here and be cheerful was low. Plus, this canine didn't appear to be lost at all. As we walked around, the dog truly began to get a move on, He was also not moving in a straight line. It appeared to be following its own path from memory, turning one way at a particular tree and the other at a rock covered in moss. To keep up, I started walking quickly, but soon I was just jogging to keep him in my sight. It didn't help that it was getting hazier constantly, and what I was following was a pure black furball. "Hey, doggy," I called out, yet it was presently running. I was close to an all-out run before I understood I was going through the forest pursuing what could be a wild creature like a crazy person. What in the world am I doing? I pondered internally as I dialed back to stop. I twisted around with my hands, kneeling down to pause and rest, and all I could hear was my own pulse and a weak stirring somewhere far off as the canine totally gotten away from me. Embracing a new lease on life following 15 minutes in the forest was not the ideal way I needed to begin my excursion. Still exhausted, I glanced around and saw that I was in a slight clearing. I didn't expect this shade of hazy amber to be cast by the sun streaming through the canopy here. It seemed as though I was toward the finish of a way. This was unusual. These state preserves typically had paths that either made a loop or reached a landmark. In most cases, paths didn't just end like this. Essentially, as far as anyone is concerned, they didn't. I knew that was a bad idea, but there was a small part of me that wanted to see where it went. I had currently sort of messed up by following that dog around here. In the event that I hadn't gotten my direction ahead of time, I could experience really been in some difficulty. Looking forward, the way didn't appear to truly lead anyplace but to more woodland. I concluded it very well may be something cool to investigate later, yet for the second I believed it best to attempt to head back. Actually look at my compass. From the blend of my own inward ability to know east from west and its perusing, I could perceive that I had taken a great deal of exciting bends in the road through this woods. My thought process would be south. Back the manner in which I came was west. The way was going in a northerly course, and to my east was the heading the canine had been running. I chose to head straightforwardly south to attempt to escape the forest as fast as could be expected. I thought I heard the dog once more, this time to my northeast, as I checked my compass and organized myself. Because I didn't want to get caught in a second wild dog chase, I ignored the rustling. Strolled at an energetic speed with the compass close by consistently, not having any desire to burn through any time. I figured I could wind up not precisely on a similar property as my lodge. Despite the town's apparent friendliness, nobody really likes strangers entering their property. The circumstance would be not difficult to make sense of, however such a situation should be stayed away from. I wasn't worried, as I hadn't really meandered exceptionally far. I was strolling to try not to need to go through large bunches of trees, continually looking at my direction to ensure I was heading the correct way. I had bypassed an outcrop of birch when I understood I was going somewhat excessively far in a southeast heading. As I strolled and concentrated on the compass, neglected to see a thick root on the ground, and stumbled a little, tumbling down on my hands. Crap, I half mumbled, half yelled as I got myself and the compass. Better watch out. Behind me, a voice called, Jesus. I spun around to see an older man with a stick, wearing a golf player's cap, and wearing a wool and sweater vest, with freight cases and elastic mutter boots standing only a couple of feet away. Not exactly, he said as he grinned to himself, entertained at my alert. It probably seemed obvious him that surprising an outsider in the forest is definitely not an extremely decent thing to do. Yet he likewise probably realized that he showed up totally innocuous. I'm sorry. Oh, I expressed, recuperating from my bewilderment. I got somewhat pivoted over here. I'm simply making a beeline for my lodge. I put the sentence out there, and it was by all accounts got by another stir a couple of feet away. I turned my head to look past the elderly person, yet he focused his eyes on me for a couple of moments. An odd second passed between us as the stirring drew nearer, and the dark canine rose up out of behind certain greeneries. The little scalawag had similar senseless smile all over as it surrounded around the man, loosened up, and afterwards sat on his rump alongside his proprietor. The elderly man reached down to scratch the dog behind his ear after recognizing my eyes. "Seems as though you met Donnie," he told me. "He didn't make you pursue him, did he?" "I wouldn't agree that he made me," I said with a little laugh, "yet I guess you could call it that." "Oh, well, that is his MO, okay." He grinned at the dog and said, "We don't get too many people out here, and this guy loves people." "You don't get many people here," I said, astounded. This was Lovely Nation, and I was unable to envision the lodge I was remaining at would experience the ill effects of an absence of tenants, particularly with the claimer I had recently found around. "Well, we get a lot of individuals dropping by the neighborhood, and a lot of the lodge individuals have their companions out constantly on the lake. However, barely anybody comes to these woods. The vast majority are cautioned off when they get acquainted enough with the town to need to investigate it." He put this doubtlessly. "Well, they're certainly passing up a great opportunity. Indeed, even the little disagreement I had with Donnie here was something truly amazing. Sure could do without getting turned around without anyone else. However, I surmise I wouldn't fret bringing the tourist debtor back home. Well, you realize how individuals are here and there. Various suppositions and such." His plain way of talking aroused my curiosity here, in a way that I didn't fully appreciate. "What are superstitions, exactly?" "Oh, you're aware. Local stuff. Indian graveyard, and what have you. We're not excessively far away from a booking. A couple of people from the clan live here in the neighborhood, yet it's all discussion, for the most part individuals saying either occurred, and they saw a soul or whatnot. I've lived right close to these woods for a really long time. It's every one of the a major heap of rubbish. However, I don't beat it down. More woodland for me." He gave me a wink and smiled. "Gracious, the lodge I'm remaining at is right close to here as well." I really look at my compass, directly over in that heading. I motioned toward the southwest. "Oh, you should remain at Carrie's home. You're a fortunate person. We're nearby neighbors. On the off chance that you count 200 or 300 yards as nearby." He broadened his hand. "I'm Al, this here's Donnie." I shook his hand, east to find a basic justification for this strange talking old folk to be over here. "Good to meet you, Al. I'm Dan. Also, good to meet you, Donnie. The previous time I let you control me." The canine grunted as I talked, turned all around, and plumped down once more. All things considered, to that end I was over here despite the fact that it's a piece late for the Bramble. This protect was so close. Faked some friendly excitement. "Well, you had a fair thought, yet you're off base around a certain something." I saw him, shocked again by how direct a northern Midwestern could be. "Should accompany age. You're not exactly like that." And he ventured somewhat nearer to me. "You're more like that." He motioned a couple of degrees contrast from where I had recently shown. "You see that large tree just a little ways off of us?" Gestured indeed. It was really unmistakable. "You stroll to that tree and head straightforwardly southwest from that point. In a flash, you'll be back at that house." I gave the thumbs up. "Hello, thanks so a lot, all. As a very remarkable site as it is currently, I truly don't have any desire to be over here without a light anymore. Don't worry about it. And meeting you was great. In the event that I don't see you once more, I want to believe that you make some pleasant memories here in Donpa. Jerry's home is only a showstopper, as well, right?" he said intentionally. Gestured an unequivocal yes. "Again, please keep that youngster out of trouble right now." The dog gave me a wink and let out a half-barked farewell as I headed toward the tree. I had made a couple of strides when an inquiry seemed obvious me. "Hello, Paul." I pivoted. Incredibly, he was all the while remaining there, totally unmoving, gazing at what used to be my back. Stopped for a couple of moments with a look of shock all over prior to acknowledging I was currently discourteously gazing at him. About 10 minutes north of here, I saw a path. Any thought where it goes or where it begins? Asked, wanting to gather a part of latest possible moment nearby information. He respected me briefly, with a weak articulation of uncertainty. The majority of this is a state preserve. None of the paths that lead to my property line are even a few miles away, and they are all clearly marked. On the off chance that you saw a way out there, it probably been made by the downpour or something different. In the event that you see it once more, I wouldn't go arranging a day around it or nothing. He left it at that. I sort of squinted at him for a couple of moments, attempting to handle two unintelligible thoughts in my mind. Okay, again, I appreciate the instructions. Enjoy your evening. I dismissed rapidly and strolled, attempting to overlook the needles in my back that I could feel his eyes shooting. Something different, he had said. That, and the notions he had referenced gave me a nauseous inclination that I didn't actually want to address right now. When I came to the large tree, I had decided to fail to remember the bizarre communication and simply partake in my end of the week. Checked my compass once more, and it was simple strolling toward the southwest. It just took me around 15 minutes to see the opening in the trees once more. At the point when I rose up out of the forest, I was a couple of yards from where I had entered. I felt like a lot had happened, despite the fact that it was only a brief excursion into the forest. I was prepared and anxious to kick back and loosen up in these sweet digs I had for the end of the week. I got into the house, removed my climbing boots, and sat back again in the cow-eyed seat. I let out a profound moan and shut my eyes briefly. The cow-eyed of the seat gave way to a practically drifting inclination. I woke to finish haziness with that dreadful sensation of having no clue about where I was. It took me one moment to collect myself. As I gasped in shock at my lack of surroundings, my first reaction was to grasp the chair's arms. With no light contamination in the encompassing region, awakening without any lights on implies awakening to finished darkness. When I felt the mind-blowing delicateness of the seat's arms, memory got back to me. Another relief sigh. I stayed there briefly, presently feeling rested. I felt senseless and excessively sketchy. In the woods, I talked to my nice elderly neighbor. Since I arrived, that was literally the only thing that happened to me. I got up cautiously and broadened my arms until I tracked down a wall. Quickly located and activated a light switch as I grasped the darkness. The family room illuminated, and was however exquisite and encouraging as it seemed to be in the daytime. I had long last seen the straightforward stone chimney on the contrary side of the wall, and gave careful consideration to give it a shot later. Actually look at the time, and amazingly it was after 12 p.m. Damn. I said out loud. The movement should have truly removed it from me. I got back from my walk around the forest around 6. It was astounding that I rested for such a long time. However, it probably been because of the calm of the climate. As I walked about, my stomach snarled. I was ravenous. I deserved a nice meal since I had only eaten lunch that day. Fortunately, I had a few essential food in a cooler pack with me. I circumvented the house and sorted out which lights related to the switches on the wall. At the point when I had set the right late evening cooking state of mind in the kitchen, I started up the stove. I pulled 2 steaks and a russet potato out of my cooler bag and placed them in a well-seasoned cast iron skillet I had found in a cupboard. I opened the packaging and placed the meat on a cutting board, seasoning the beef and letting it warm up while I prepared the potatoes. The meat was still pretty cool. As I was slicing the tubers up to bubble, I liked them crushed. I assumed I heard something outside, like the pat of hooves or something to that effect. Should be a deer, I contemplated internally and continued to cut. I had placed a pot of water on the oven to keep the diced potatoes in when I heard it once more. It had an unmistakable loping example to it and seemed like a creature. However, it was really clearly, it should be a deer, I pondered internally. I put the cast iron on the oven and turned it high, pouring a little oil in to burn the steaks. I was too eager to even think about mindful until I heard the snap click of hooves on the back deck. Turned to the right and heard the same hooves on wood sound as what looked like deer legs disappeared to the left of the glass wall. Remained there briefly, tuning in. I was unable to hear something else. Question crawled into my head, crawling along like a slug. Wasn't completely certain that what I had recently seen were deer legs. I assumed I had seen hooves, and I assumed I saw a leg. The leg, notwithstanding, looked white. The squeamish inclination crawled once again into my stomach. The anxious butterflies were flipping around as I strolled toward the lounge area to put lights onto the back deck. The entire porch lit up when I turned on the lights. Nothing existed there. I strolled over to the entryway and slid it open. Looking my head outside, I looked left and right. The sky was overcast, and there were no stars or the moon. The sensation of being watched returned. There was only cool air and obscurity. I yelled, "It's probably a deer," and it was. If you're feeling delusional, just saying something out loud can sometimes help. I shut and locked the way to the deck, yet left the light on. This day had been sufficiently bizarre, and the main thing that was holding me back from being drained again was the manner by which hungry I was. Chose to ensure the front entryway was as yet locked. The keys were securely in my pocket. I moved toward the entryway. However, fortunately, I could as of now see the deadbolt was gotten. For my own peace of mind, I wanted to make sure the doorknob was securely fastened. I went after the switch on the handle when I heard 3 boisterous thumps. Cans of ice supplanted my blood as a virus wave washed over me from my ears to the pit of my stomach and down to my toes. Couldn't move and was staring at the doorknob. The couple of moments passed in sheer fear as I thought about the closest thing I could use to safeguard myself. Nobody ought to thump on anybody's entryway in this sort of a spot during this season of night without a seriously valid justification. My bag was right next to the door, and the knife was on the cutting board. My hand was as yet a couple inches away from the door handle. I considered connecting further to completely lock it, when I heard the voice. "I'm help. Could you at any point please? Lost." It seemed like a female voice, yet the words had neither rhyme nor reason. I have played this frozen memory over in my mind many times, and I'm certain this is what I heard. I didn't move or say anything. Although there was only a 15-second pause, a few hours passed. I heard 2 snap clicks on the stone external the entryway, and afterward another 3 thumps, gentler this time. "Please, terrified. I'm so need lost. I'm help." It was somewhat more frantic this time, and, surprisingly, more counterintuitive. When this occasion rehashed the same thing, tad of clearness came to me. Hearing it the initial time, I assumed I was losing it. Presently, I knew 2 things. Whatever was on the opposite side of the entryway wasn't my companion, and I wasn't moving but to get a weapon. I would have rather not offered any hint that I could hear them, however, some way or another. Realized it could detect my presence, so I remained as still as could be expected, feeling my heart pound in my chest while doing whatever it takes not to hyperventilate. My eyes augmented as I heard more rattling of hooves on stone. It seemed like it had surrounded around itself, making 5 or 6 strides. The canine close to its proprietor from prior in the day streaked in my mind briefly. Another 3 knocks. Urgent. Harder than the initial time. Don't entryway. You can stress the open at this point. I began shuddering a little as I heard this. The voice was different. A moderately aged man's voice. Assuming that I needed to pee, I could have. My throat was completely dry, and I was vigorously considering going for the blade. From one viewpoint, this affirmed my doubt that what I was managing probably won't be human. Then again, it made me keep thinking about whether there was more than one of them. I didn't have a lot of opportunity to contemplate. The door jamb shook as the interloper beat on the entryway multiple times. I remained still, having the impression that I was free falling into the unending well of my own gut. No one but I can slice through the forest, you can't. As these sounds entered my ears, I let out a perceptible heave, then gagged on my own throat. It was a kid's voice, a young man. As I attempted to recuperate, it answered my tell by beating and scratching on the entryway, apparently attempting to hold any up it could now that it realized I was there. Tumbled to my knees in shock, simply gazing at the entryway with tears in my eyes like a bewildered nitwit. The entire house appeared to shake as the entryway was almost thrashed. All of a sudden, everything stopped. As it clattered away from the house, all I could hear was an endless series of brief screeches. I got a brief look at it through a side window as it ran away, the shrieking beating in my ears. In any case, it was exceptionally enormous. I was suspicious a blade would have helped me much in the event that it had traversed the entryway. Nevertheless, the shrieking proceeded. I was sure it probably been a supernatural substance to have the option to extend sound at such a distance, until I investigated at the kitchen and saw smoke surging out of the skillet on the oven. The smoke caution was going off. I moaned alleviation and nearly grinned to myself. I never anticipated that one should save me like that. I had been envisioning the specific place of the blade while remaining there in fear. However, my eyes had been locked on the entryway the whole time. I let the alert happen for quite a while, trusting it would keep that thing under control. I eliminated the dish from the intensity with a pot holder, obviously, and painstakingly poured more oil in the skillet to chill everything off. In the long run, I switched off the stove and the caution. I wasn't eager any longer. Turned on a roof fan and each light in the house. After that, I went back, locked the switch on the doorknob, and I locked every window I could find. Tracked down the main room with an internal swinging entryway, and put a seat from the lounge area in it. I pondered calling the police, yet I didn't have administration, and there was no landline or web in the house. What exactly would I say to them? I was completely gone ballistic, yet I realized I could unfortunately do a limited amount a lot. I made plans to leave at the break of day, regardless of whether it was only for some inn where less possibility of was being destroyed by some obscure, voice-changing, benefited animal of the evening. I kept the blade alongside me and remained in the room with the entryway caught by the seat. I didn't have a good sense of reassurance. However, I felt like I had depleted my choices for keeping up with well-being. In any case, in the event that it could overcome this, I most likely was never intended to make it. I brought a diary up here as well, to record all that occurred as it's new in my mind, and to put me to work as opposed to resting. I can't rest here realizing that thing is out there. As I said, I've replayed what occurred at that entryway multiple times in my mind. When I finally realized what had me so twisted up the last time I heard it speak, or whatever it was doing that sounded like human voices, around 3 a.m., I was close to falling asleep. You can't cut through the woods. Only I can. It was spoken by a child. It sounded from the beginning like it was an admonition, and I assumed I was hearing it since it had seen me before, intruding in its region. However, as I heard it for the 100th time in my mind, I understood I had experience with both the words and the voice. Somebody had expressed that to me previously.